Hi everyone, I'm Miss B. Hanley, and today we are continuing our reading of Chapter of the Giver by Lois Lowry. Chapters 8 through 14 is what I'm planning on reading tonight. And welcome in. Let's turn down our music a little bit. Here we go. All right, so we're gonna get started with reading tonight. Last time we read through chapters 1 through 7 of The Giver. And we met Jonas, who is our protagonist. He is our main character of the story. And he struggles to find he's struggled to figure out how he's feeling because there is a big ceremony coming up for him called the Ceremony of 12. And at this ceremony, all of the children in the community are given their assignment, their role in the community. So they could be a nurturer, they could be a pilot, they could be a doctor, they could be an engineer, they could be a birth mother. And Jonas is not sure really where he fits in. You know, he doesn't really seem to have a special aptitude like certain people his age. He just kind of likes, working in all different parts of the community. So he's really nervous. He's apprehensive about this upcoming ceremony. And, he's talking to his mother and father about their roles and how they were assigned their jobs. And, they kind of assure him like, hey, it's going to be okay because the council who runs the community, the community of elders, they're always, watching you and making sure that they're going to find a special role for you, the role that actually fits you and your personality. Because everything in the community is very carefully monitored, and the committee of elders are very much in control of people's lives. All of the children are assigned to families. All of the spouses are assigned to each other. And so there is no real choice, but there is also no conflict because there is no choice. You wouldn't have people who are not compatible together staying together for years. You wouldn't have people who, having children who don't want children or are not good at taking care of children. So it's, everything's taken care of by the committee of elders. And so they're assuring him like, hey, you're going to be okay because the committee of elders has been watching you and they're going to find the right position for you. And so we also learn a little bit about Jonas's family, the characters around him, his mother and father. He has a younger sister, Lily, and he has friends named Asher and Fiona, who he meets with, he hangs out with. And he also, who else? Oh, and his father is also a nurturer. So he takes care of the new children, the children who have just been born. And there's a child that he's taking care of. He's very concerned about, named Gabriel, and he's not developing, and they're worried that he's going to be released. By the way, we don't know yet what release is. They just kind of talk about it. They know it's a serious thing, and it only happens to people who are old, babies who are not developed well, or people who broke a rule in the community. So release is kind of this thing that's very serious in the community, but Jonas, has a moment where he talks with someone in the community and neither of them really talk about what it is, right? They're like, release, where does anybody go? We don't know, but they just don't come back. We also learn in Jonas's community that there are no such thing as animals. We know this because both he and his younger sister reference it in the very beginning of the book, but it says specifically in the book that neither one of them knows what that word exactly means. Additionally, they have these things when they're younger called comfort objects, which are basically stuffed animals, but Jonas says that they are creatures that are imaginary. They are not real creatures that these stuffed creatures are, because he doesn't think that an elephant is real. He's never seen an elephant. Or a hippo or a teddy or a bear, right? So he thinks that they're imaginary, and so does everybody else in the community. So we know that this community is very heavily controlled by the committee, and it seems like there are a lot of things in their world that we don't have in our world. And they run things in a very different way than we have run our society. So we've gotten to the ceremony of 12 for Jonas. And he is waiting patiently to be called to the stage to receive his assignment. And when his number comes up, he is skipped. And he doesn't know what he's done wrong. and he doesn't know if the elder, the chief elder, has made a mistake by not calling his number. And so he is really sweating it right now in in the auditorium in the stadium where this is being taken place, and everybody else is really concerned because they know that Jonas's number has been skipped, and everyone's really seems to be on edge because they don't know what is going to happen. So that is where we are picking up, and that means we are going to go through the portal, magical library portal, into reading the book. Here we go. Let me find my page. There we are. All right. Chapter 8. The audience was clearly ill at ease. They applauded at the final assignment, but the applause was piecemeal, no longer a crescendo of united enthusiasm. There were murmurs of confusion. Jonas moved his hands together, clapping, but it was an automatic, meaningless gesture that he wasn't even aware of. His mind had shut out all of the earlier emotions, the anticipation, excitement, pride, and even the happy kinship with his friends. Now he felt only humiliation and terror. I think Jonas is especially feeling this humiliation because it's very shameful to be different in his community. So the fact that he's been singled out is very much abnormal, and it's not something he's used to. And it's making him feel like he did something bad. The chief elder waited until the uneasy applause subsided. Then she spoke again. I know, she said in her vibrant, gracious voice, that you all are concerned, that you feel I have made a mistake. She smiled. The community, relieved from its discomfort very slightly by her benign statement, seemed to breathe more easily. It was very silent. Jonas looked up. I have caused you anxiety, she said. I apologize to my community. Her voice flowed over the assembled crowd. We accept your apology, they all uttered together. Jonas, she said, looking down at him, I apologize to you in particular. I caused you anguish. I accept your apology, Jonas replied shakily. Please come to the stage now. Earlier that day, dressing in his own dwelling, he had practiced the kind of jaunty, self-assured walk that he hoped he could make to the stage when his turn came. All of that was forgotten now. He simply willed himself to stand, to move his feet that felt weighted and clumsy, to go forward, up the steps and across the platform until he stood at her side. Reassuringly, she placed her arm across his tense shoulders. Jonas has not been assigned, she informed the crowd, and his heart sank. Then she went on. Jonas has been selected. He blinked. What did that mean? He felt a collective questioning stir from the audience. They too were puzzled. In a firm, commanding voice, she announced, Jonas has been selected to be our receiver of memory. Then she heard the gasp, the sudden intake of breath, drawn sharply in astonishment by each of the seated citizens. He saw their faces, the eyes widened in awe, and he still did not understand. Such a selection is very, very rare, the chief elder told the audience. Our community has only one receiver. It is he who trains his successor. We have had our current receiver for a very long time, she went on. Jonas followed her eyes and saw that she was looking at one of the elders. The committee of elders was sitting together in a group, and the chief elder's eyes were now on one who sat in the midst but seemed oddly separate from them. It was a man Jonas had never noticed before, a bearded man with pale eyes. He was watching Jonas intently. We failed in our last selection, the chief elder said solemnly. It was 10 years ago when Jonas was just a toddler. I will not dwell on the experience because it causes us all terrible discomfort. Jonas didn't know what she was referring to, but he could sense the discomfort of the audience. They shifted uneasily in their seats. We have not been hasty this time, she continued. We could not afford another failure. Sometimes, she went on, speaking now in a lighter tone, relaxing the tension in the auditorium, we are not entirely certain about the assignments, even after the most painstaking observations. Sometimes we worry that the one assigned might not develop through training every attribute necessary. 11s are still children after all. What we observe as playfulness and patience, the requirements to become a nurturer, could, with maturity, be revealed as simply foolishness and indolence. So we continue to observe during training and to modify behavior when necessary. But the receiver in training cannot be observed, cannot be modified. This is stated quite clearly in the rules. He is to be alone, apart, while he is prepared by the current receiver for the job which is the most honored in our community. Alone? Apart? Jonas listened with increasing unease. Therefore, the selection must be sound. It must be unanimous choice of the committee. They must have no doubts, however fleeting. If, during the process, an elder reports a dream of uncertainty, that dream has the power to set a candidate aside instantly. Jonas was identified as a possible receiver many years ago. We have observed him meticulously. There were no dreams of uncertainty. He has shown all of the qualities that a receiver must have. With her hand still firmly on his shoulder, the chief elder listed the qualities. Intelligence, she said. We are all aware that Jonas has been a top student throughout his school days. Integrity, she said next. Jonas has, like all of us, committed minor transgressions. She smiled at him. We expect that. We also hoped that he would present himself promptly for chastisement, and he has always done so. Just to pause here real quick, integrity meaning like not that you always say sorry, but just that you know when to say sorry, right? Like that you have enough you can swallow your pride enough to admit when you've made a mistake or when you've done something wrong, and knowing when to like own up to it, right? That's integrity. That's the whole point of like what she means here. Like presenting himself promptly for chastisement, obviously being like he's going forward and saying, "Hey, I messed up. I'm going to apologize and I'm going to not do it anymore," basically. Courage, she went on. Only one of us here today has ever undergone the rigorous training required of a receiver. He, of course, is the most important member of the committee, the current receiver. It was he who reminded us again and again of the courage required. Jonas, she said, turning to him, but speaking in a voice that the entire community could hear. The training required of you involves pain, physical pain. He felt fear flutter within him. You have never experienced that. Yes, you have scraped your knees in falls from your bicycle. Yes, you've crushed your finger in a door last year. Jonas nodded, agreeing, as he recalled the incident and his accompanying misery. But you will be faced now, she explained gently, with pain of magnitude that none of us here can comprehend because it is beyond our experience. The receiver himself was not able to describe it, only to remind us that you would be faced with it, that you would need immense courage. We cannot prepare you for that. But we feel certain that you are brave, she said to him. He did not feel brave at all, not now. The fourth essential attribute, the chief elder said, is wisdom. Jonas has not yet acquired that. The acquisition of wisdom will come through his training. We are convinced that Jonas has the ability to acquire wisdom. That is what we looked for. Finally, the receiver must have one more quality, and it is one which I can only name but not describe. I do not understand it. You members of the community will not understand it either. Perhaps Jonas will, because the current receiver has told us that Jonas already has this quality. He calls it the capacity to see beyond. The chief elder looked at Jonas with question in her eyes. The audience watched him too. They were silent. For a moment he froze, consumed with despair. He didn't have it. Though whatever she had said, he didn't know what it was. Now was the moment when he would have to confess, to say, "No, I don't, I can't," and throw himself on their mercy, ask their forgiveness, to explain that he had been wrongly chosen, that he was not the right one at all. But then he looked out across the crowd, the sea of faces. The thing happened again, the thing that had happened with the apple. They changed. He blinked and it was gone. His shoulders straightened slightly. Briefly, he felt a tiny sliver of sureness for the first time. She was still watching him. They all were. "I think it's true," the chief elder and the community. He told the chief elder and the community, I don't understand it yet. I don't know what it is, but sometimes I see something, and maybe it's beyond. She took her arm from his shoulders. Jonas, she said, speaking not to him alone, but to the entire community of which he was a part. You will be trained to be our next receiver of memory. We thank you for your childhood. Then she turned and left the stage, left him there alone, standing and facing the crowd, which began spontaneously the collective murmur of his name. Jonas. It was a whisper at first, hushed, barely audible. Jonas, Jonas. Then louder, faster. Jonas, Jonas, Jonas. With the chant, Jonas knew the community was accepting him and his new role, giving him life the way they had given it to the new child, Caleb. His heart swelled with gratitude and pride, but at the same time, he was filled with fear. He did not know what his selection meant. He did not know what he was to become or what would become of him. Okay, so we finished off with the ceremony of 12. Jonas was skipped, but he was skipped because he was chosen. He was selected instead for this special job, the receiver of memory. So this is a pretty big deal because, I mean, we know this because everybody does a collective gasp, right? When she's like, this is who he's going to be. We've selected him for this. Everyone's like, oh my gosh. Everyone's like, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is serious. So it seems like this is a big deal. And it does say that the committee had failed the last time they selected somebody, which means that they were either like not up to it. They didn't have all of the attributes. I mean, the other thing here is that this training is going to require pain, physical pain, something that nobody in the community has ever experienced before, like on a level that's like so immense that nobody can describe, right? Like she's not talking about like falling and scraping your knee or like crushing your finger or something. Like that's like, I mean, it's still painful, but like it's not like, I guess maybe like breaking your arm or even like having pain from being tortured. I don't know. Like that's the thing. I mean, I do know because I have read this book, but that's the whole point is that nobody in the community has experienced the level of pain that he's going to experience. So their previous selection may have failed because they were not able to withstand the amount of pain that they were going to experience. Also, we get this little bit of information here about Jonas's ability. And it's about him being able to see beyond, right? Of course, highlighted it too many colors. But at first he's like, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what they're talking about seeing beyond. And then he looks at the crowd and he's saying they're changed again. So last time we read about Jonas, like seeing something happen with this apple. And he didn't know what it was. And he ended up getting into trouble because he was like so like astounded by this that he took it home and he wasn't supposed to. And it's like he didn't do it on purpose. It was just because he was like so surprised. Like, what is this? Like, why is this changing? You know? But then it does again. Whatever happened with the apple is happening when he looks out onto the crowd. So he's like, okay, well, now I finally have a name for this. Maybe this is what they're talking about, the seeing beyond. And we also meet the current receiver. He's one of the members of the committee of the elders, and he's the most important member, right? Is what she says somewhere here. Where did I have it? Yeah. He who trains his successor. Must be a unanimous thing. Most important member of the committee. He said it. She said it. It was the most important member of the committee. And we don't know why. And he has pale eyes, just like Jonas does, right? That's another big thing is that the current receiver has the same pale eyes that Jonas does. So maybe that's some kind of connection between the seeing beyond and the color of their eyes. Okay, let's continue on into chapter 9. Now, for the first time in his 12 years of life, Jonas felt separate, different. He remembered what the chief elder had said, that his training would be alone and apart. But his training had not yet begun, and already, upon leaving the auditorium, he felt the apartness. Holding the folder she had given him, he made his way through the throng, looking for his family until he found family unit and for Asher. People moved a sign for him. They watched him. He thought he could hear whispers, which I have. Ash, he called, spotting his friend near the rows of bicycles. Ride back with me? Sure, Asher smiled, his usual smile. Friendly and familiar, but Jonas felt a moment of hesitation from his friend, an uncertainty. Congratulations, Asher said. You too, Jonas replied. It was really funny when she told about the smacks. You got more applause than almost anybody else. The other new 12s clustered nearby, placing their folders carefully into the carrying containers on the backs of the bikes. In each dwelling tonight, they would be studying the instructions for the beginning of their trainings. Each night for years, the children had memorized the required lessons for school, often yawning with boredom. Tonight, they would all begin eagerly to memorize the rules for their adult assignments. Congratulations, Asher, someone called. Then, that hesitation again. You too, Jonas. Asher and Jonas responded with congratulations to their group mates. Jonas saw his parents watching him from the place where their own bicycles were waiting. Lily had already been strapped into her seat. He waved. They waved back, smiling, but he noticed that Lily was watching him solemnly, her thumb in her mouth. He rode directly to his dwelling, exchanging only small jokes and unimportant remarks with Asher. See you in the morning, Recreation Director, he called, dismounting by his door as Asher continued on. Right, see you. Asher called back. Once again, there was just a moment when things weren't quite the same, weren't quite as they always had been through their long friendship. Perhaps he had imagined it. Things couldn't change with Asher. The evening meal was quieter than usual. Lily chattered about her plans for volunteer work she would begin, she said, at the nurturing center, since she was already an expert at feeding Gabriel. I know, she added quickly when her father gave her a warning glance. I won't mention his name. I know I'm not supposed to know his name. I can't wait for tomorrow to come, she said happily. Jonas sighed uneasily. I can, he muttered. You've been greatly honored, his mother said. Your father and I are very proud. It's the most important job in the community. But just the other night you said the job of making assignments was the most important. Mother nodded. This is different. This is not a job, really. I never expected. She paused. There's only one receiver. But the chief elder said that they made a selection before, and that it failed. What was she talking about? Both of his parents hesitated. Finally, his father described the previous selection. It was very much as it was today, Jonas. The same suspense as 111 had been passed over when the assignments were given. Then the announcement when they singled out the one. Jonas interrupted. What was his name? His mother replied. Her, not his. It was a female. But we are never to speak the name or to use it again for a new child. Jonas was shocked. A name designated not to be spoken indicated the highest degree of disgrace. What happened to her? He asked nervously. But his parents looked blank. We don't know, his father said uncomfortably. We never saw her again. A silence fell over the room. They looked at each other. Finally, his mother, rising from the table, said, You've been greatly honored, Jonas. Greatly honored. Okay, so this is interesting because we get a little bit more information about what happened before with the previous selection. It was a girl, and they can't say her name out loud because it's apparently been disgraced, right? I guess she failed, basically, right? So it must be some kind of really bad thing. And he even comments on this, right? That this was the highest degree of disgrace. But his parents don't know what happened to her. And they're not like saying anything about after what happened to her. So either they've forgotten, they've blocked it out, or they really don't know. The only other time that we don't really know what happens to people and when we never see them again is with release. So that's the best guess that we really have at this point to figure out what happened to her. But she could have, there's other things that could have happened, but they're not talking about it, right? They can't talk about it, probably because they don't want anybody to talk about it. Alone in his sleeping room, prepared for bed, Jonas opened his folder at last. Some of the other 12s he had noticed had been given folders thick with printed pages. He imagined Benjamin, the scientific male in his group, beginning to read pages of rules and instructions with relish. He pictured Fiona smiling her gentle smile as she bent over the lists of duties and methods that she would be required to learn in the days to come. But his own folder was startlingly close to empty. Inside, there was only a single printed sheet. He read it twice. Jonas, receiver of memory. 1. Go immediately at the end of school hours each day to the annex entrance behind the house of the old and present yourself to the attendant. 2. Go immediately to your dwelling at the conclusion of training hours each day. 3. From this moment, you are exempted from rules governing rudeness. You may ask any question of any citizen, and you will receive answers. Number 4. Do not discuss your training with any other member of the community, including parents and elders. Well, that's weird, right? Why is that highlighting 2 parts? That's wild. Oh, okay. I didn't. Wait a minute. I didn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Okay, so, all right, calm down. What? Okay, I don't know what's going on with that. From this moment, you are prohibited from dream telling. Number 6, except for illness or injury unrelated to your training, do not apply for any medication. Number 7, you are not permitted to apply for release. Number 8, you may lie. Okay, so these are really interesting because, again, like we get more information about Jonas's community based on these rules that, like, he obviously has his background information that we don't. So the first one that I highlighted is talking about the rules governing rudeness, because it seems like there's like a rudeness rule in the community where you're not allowed to like ask rude questions, which I assume are stuff like, you know, how old are you? Where did you get that bump on your forehead? Something like that. Why are your, okay. So like they talk about it earlier in the book, like, why are your eyes a different color? Lily bringing up the color of Jonas's eyes and saying like, oh, the baby Gabriel has the same pale eyes as you do. And so that seems to be like a rude thing, but he is exempted from it. He can go around talking and saying stuff like that to people and asking questions like that without ever having any consequences. The other rules that seem to be interesting here are not discussing his training with anyone, including parents and elders, right? Like if his parents or any of his elders ask him about it, he has to lie, going to number 8. We'll come back there in a second, but he has to, like, he can't talk about it. Number 5, he's prohibited from dream telling, which is interesting because they mentioned it in the previous chapter about how, like, if one of the elders had a dream of uncertainty, they had to report it and set the candidate aside. So like his dreams must be like really important as the receiver of memory, and so much that he can't tell anybody what he dreamed, which is really interesting. Number 7 is another one. You're not permitted to apply for release. So even if he wanted to get out, like out of the job, he wouldn't be able to, right? He would be like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to have this job anymore. It's too hard or whatever. He's not allowed to leave. And then number 8, he can lie, which is obviously you can't lie in the community. It's a rule. There's a rule against lying, which is strange because sometimes you can lie and get away with it. And it's interesting because, like, how would you know what lies you could get away with and what you couldn't get away with? But anyway, Jonas is now allowed to lie, which I guess would then protect him from spilling his dreams or talking about his training, right? Like he can just pretend like he's talking about something and it's not really true. Okay, let's see what Jonas thinks about this. Jonas was stunned. What would happen to his friendships, his mindless hours playing ball or riding his bikes along the river? Those had been happy and vital times for him. Were they to be completely taken from him now? The simple logistic instructions, where to go and when, were expected. Every 12 had to be told, of course, where and how and when to report for training, but he was a little dismayed that his schedule left no time, apparently, for recreation. The exemption from rudeness startled him. Reading it again, however, he realized that it didn't compel him to be rude. It simply allowed him the option. He was quite certain he would never take advantage of it. He was so completely, so thoroughly accustomed to courtesy within the community that the thought... Okay, I don't know. Why is it why is it doing that? I wonder why my Kindle is messing up here with the highlighting. It's very strange. Okay, well, what did I want to highlight? I wanted to highlight this. Okay, perfect. There we go. Um, he was so completely and thoroughly accustomed to courtesy within the community that he thought of asking another citizen an intimate question, of calling someone's attention to an area of awkwardness, was unnerving. The prohibition of dream telling, he thought, would not be a real problem. He dreamed so rarely that the dream telling did not come easily to him anyway, and he was glad to be excused from it. He wondered briefly, though, how to deal with the morning meal. What if he did dream? Should he simply tell his family unit, as he did so often anyway, that he hadn't? That would be a lie. Still, the final rule said, well, he wasn't ready to think about the final rule on the page. The restriction of medication unnerved him. Medication was always available to its citizens, even to children, though through their parents. When he had crushed his finger in the door, he had quickly, gasping to the speaker, notified his mother. She had hastily requisitioned relief of pain medication, which had promptly been delivered to his dwelling. Almost instantly, the excruciating pain in his hand had diminished to the throb which was now all he could recall of the experience. Rereading rule number 6, he realized that a crushed finger fell into the category of unrelated to training. So if it ever happened again, and he was quite certain it wouldn't, he had been very careful near heavy doors since the accident, he could still receive medication. The pill he took now each morning was also unrelated to the training. So he would continue to receive the pill. But then he remembered uneasily what the chief elder had said about the pain that would come with his training. She had called it indescribable. Jonas swallowed hard, trying without success to imagine what such pain might be like with no medication at all. But it was beyond his comprehension. He felt no reaction to rule number 7 at all. It had never occurred to him that under any circumstances ever he might apply for release. Finally, he steeled himself to read the final rule again. He had been trained since earliest childhood, since his earliest learning of language, never to lie. It was an integral part of the learning of precise speech. Once, when he had been a 4, he had said, just prior to the midday meal at school, "I'm starving." Immediately, he had been taken aside for a brief private lesson on language precision. He was not starving, it was pointed out. He was hungry. No one in the community was starving. He had never been starving, nor would he ever be starving. To say starving was to speak a lie. An unintentional lie, of course, but the reason for precision of language was to ensure that unintentional lies were never uttered. Did he understand that? They asked him, and he had. He had never, within his memory, been tempted to lie. Asher did not lie. Lily did not lie. His parents did not lie. No one did, unless... Now Jonas had a thought that he had never had before. This new thought was frightening. What if others, adults, upon becoming 12s, received in their instructions the same terrifying sentence? What if they had all been instructed, "You may lie"? His mind reeled. Now empowered to ask questions of utmost rudeness and promised answers, he could conceivably, though it was almost unimaginable, ask someone, some adult, his father perhaps, "Do you lie?" But he would have no way of knowing if the answer he received were true. Okay, so this chapter is really interesting, mainly because we finally get a glimpse into what Jonas's job is going to entail for him. And we know that it's going to be different than everybody. They've already talked about how it's like separate and apart. And at the beginning of the chapter, he immediately starts to experience that, right? He's even feeling like there's a hesitation with Asher, right? When he's chit-chatting with him after the ceremony and they're riding back home together. And it's strange for Jonas. It kind of worries him because he's like, usually we're friends, we're friendly. We've always been friends. It's like things can't change with him, but it does seem like they are going to. And then even his parents are kind of have this like very revered perception of him, especially when his mother says like she's having a difficult time like describing what it really means. She's like, there's only one receiver. So it's not like, because there are multiple nurturers, there are multiple people in the Justice Department, there are multiple birth mothers, there are multiple elders, right? Like there are multiple of each job because that's the way the community has to be, except for the receiver. The receiver is the only one in the community, which means that the current receiver is now something else, right? Because Jonas is now the receiver. So that's just a hint at what we're getting into in the next couple of chapters. But yeah, he reads the rules, which are really interesting, and it makes him really begin. This is his first night with his new assignment, and he's already begin to question his community, especially because his rule says that he can lie, which is like something that has never been imagined by him. He's never even imagined committing a lie because, like, even when he did an unintentional lie of saying I'm starving, right, he got in trouble for it. So there's a strong incentive not to lie and to be honest. And the fact that he's gotten this rule scares him because what if other people have gotten that rule? What if people can lie and he just doesn't know it? And he doesn't know how to see if they're lying or not, right? And again, he, brings up this thing about like, asking people if they lie, but never knowing if they're going to tell you the truth. So pretty tough stuff for a 12-year-old to experience and start thinking about his whole life, the last 12 years of his life, just basically like changing in one day. Okay, let's continue. Chapter 10. I go in here, Jonas, Fiona told him when they reached the front door of the House of the Old after parking their bicycles in the designated area. I don't know why I'm nervous, she confessed. I've been here so often before. She turned her folder over in her hands. Well, everything's different now, Jonas reminded her. Even the nameplates on our bikes, Fiona laughed. During the night, the nameplate of each new 12 had been removed by the maintenance crew and replaced with the style that indicated citizen in training. I don't want to be late, she said hastily, and hurried up the step and started up the steps. If we finish at the same time, I'll ride home with you. Jonas nodded, waved to her, and headed around the building toward the annex, a small wing attached to the back. He certainly didn't want to be late for his first day of training either. The annex was very ordinary, its door unremarkable. He reached for the heavy handle, then noticed a buzzer on the wall, so he buzzed it instead. Yes, the voice came through a small speaker above the buzzer. It's, Jonas. Come in. A click indicated that the door had been unlocked. The lobby was very small and contained only a desk at which a female attendant sat working on some papers. She looked up when he entered. Then, to his surprise, she stood. It was a small thing, the standing, but no one had ever stood automatically to acknowledge Jonas's presence before. Welcome, receiver of memory, she said respectfully. Oh, please, he replied uncomfortably. Call me Jonas. She smiled, pressed a button, and he heard a click that unlocked the door on the left. You may go right in, she told him. Then she seemed to notice his discomfort and to realize its origin. No doors in the community were locked, ever. None that Jonas knew of anyway. The locks are simply to ensure the receiver's privacy because he needs concentration, she explained. It would be difficult if citizens wandered in looking for the Department of Bicycle Repair or something. Jonas laughed, relaxing a little. The woman seemed very friendly, and it was true. In fact, it was a joke throughout the community that the Department of Bicycle Repair, an unimportant little office, was relocated so often that no one ever knew where it was. There's nothing dangerous here, she told him. But, he added, glancing at the wall clock, he doesn't like to be kept waiting. Jonas hurried through the door and found himself in a comfortably furnished area. It was not unlike his own family unit's dwelling. Furniture was standard throughout the community, practical, sturdy, the function of each piece clearly defined, a bed for sleeping, a table for eating, a desk for studying. All of those things were in this spacious room, though each was slightly different from his own dwelling. The fabrics on the upholstered chairs and sofa were slightly thicker and more luxurious. The table legs were not straight like those at home, but slender and curved, with small carved decoration at the foot. The bed in an alcove at the far end of the room was draped with splendid cloth embroidered over its entire surface with intricate designs. But the most conspicuous difference was the books. In his own dwelling, there were the necessary reference volumes that each household contained, a dictionary, and the thick community volume which contained descriptions of every office, factory, building, and committee, and the book of rules, of course. The books in his own dwelling were the only books that Jonas had ever seen. He had never known that other books existed. But this room's walls were completely covered by bookcases, filled with which reached to the ceiling. There must have been hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, their titles embossed in shiny letters. Jonas stared at them. He couldn't imagine what the thousands of pages contained. Could there be rules beyond the rules that governed the community? Could there be more descriptions of offices and factories and committees? He had only a second to look around because he was aware that a man sitting in the chair beside the table was watching him. Hastily, he moved forward and stood before the man, bowed slightly, and said, "I'm Jonas." "I know. Welcome, receiver of memory." Jonas recognized the man. He was the elder who had seemed separate from the others at the ceremony, though he was dressed in the same special clothing that only the elders wore. Jonas looked self-consciously into the pale eyes that mirrored his own. "Sir, I apologize for my lack of understanding." He waited, but the man did not give the standard accepting of apology response. After a moment, Jonas went on. I think, he corrected, reminding himself that if precision of language were ever to be important, it was certainly important now in the presence of this man, "that you are the receiver of memory. I was only selected yesterday. I'm not anything at all, not yet." The man looked at him thoughtfully, silently. It was a look that combined interest, curiosity, and concern, and perhaps little sympathy as well. Finally, he spoke. "Beginning today, this moment, at least to me, you are the receiver." "I have been the receiver for a long time, a very, very long time. You can see that, can't you?" Jonas nodded. The man was wrinkled, and his eyes, though piercing in their unusual lightness, seemed tired. The flesh around them was darkened into shadowed circles. "I can see that you are very old," Jonas responded with respect. The old were always given the highest respect. The man smiled. He touched the sagging flesh on his own face with amusement. "I'm not actually as old as I look," he told Jonas. "This job has aged me. I know I look as if I should be scheduled for release very soon, but actually I have a good deal of time left. I was pleased, though, when you were selected. It took them a long time. The failure of the previous selection was 10 years ago, and my energy is starting to diminish. I need what strength I have remaining for your training. We have hard and painful work to do, you and I. Please, sit down," he said, and gestured toward the nearby chair. Jonas lowered himself into the soft cushioned seat. The man closed his eyes and continued speaking. "When I became a 12, I was selected as you were. I was frightened, as I'm sure you are." He opened his eyes for a moment and peered at Jonas, who nodded. The eyes closed again. "I came to this very room to begin my training. It was such a long time ago. The previous receiver seemed as old to me as I do to you. He was just as tired as I am today." He sat forward suddenly, opened his eyes, and said, "You may ask questions. I have so little experience in describing this process. It is forbidden to talk of it." "I know, sir. I have read the instructions," Jonas said. "So I may neglect to make things as clear as I should," the man chuckled. "My job is important and has enormous honor, but that does not mean I am perfect. And when I tried before to train a successor, I failed. Please ask any questions that will help you." In his mind, Jonas had questions, 1,000, 1,000,000 questions, as many questions as there were books lining the walls, but he did not ask one, not yet. The man sighed, seeming to put his thoughts in order. Then he spoke again. "Simply stated," he said, "although it is not really simple at all, my job is to transmit to you all of the memories I have within me, memories of the past." "Sir," Jonas said tentatively, "I would be very interested to hear the story of your life and listen to your memories. I apologize for interrupting," he added quickly. The man waved his hand impatiently. "No apologies in this room. We haven't time." "Well," Jonas went on, uncomfortably aware that he might be interrupting again, "I'm really interested. I don't mean that I'm not, but I don't exactly understand why it's so important. I could do some adult job in the community, and in my recreation time, I could come and listen to the stories from your childhood I'd like that, actually, he added. I've done that already in the house of the old. The old like to tell about their childhoods, and it's always fun to listen. The man shook his head. No, no, he said. I'm not being clear. It's not my past, it's not my childhood that I must transmit to you. He leaned back, resting his head against the back of the upholstered chair. It's the memories of the whole world, he said, with a sigh. Before you, before me, before the previous receiver, and generations before him. Jonas frowned. The whole world? He asked. I don't understand. Do you mean not just us? Not just this community? Do you mean elsewhere too? He tried, in his mind, to grasp the subject. I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand exactly. Maybe I'm not smart enough. I don't know what you mean when you say the whole world and generations before him. I thought there was only us. Why can't I highlight this? Okay. I thought there was only now. There's much more. There's all that goes beyond, all that is elsewhere, and all that goes back and back and back. I received all of those when I was selected, and here in this room, all alone, I re-experience them again and again. It is how wisdom comes and how we shape our future. He rested for a moment, breathing deeply. I am so weighted with them, he said. Jonas felt a terrible concern for the man suddenly. It's as if the man paused, seeming to search his mind for the right words of description. It's like going downhill through deep snow on a sled, he said finally. At first, it's exhilarating. The speed, the sharp, clear air. But then the snow accumulates, builds up on the runners, and you slow, and you have to push hard to keep going, and he shook his head suddenly and peered at Jonas. That meant nothing to you, did it? He asked. Jonas was confused. I didn't understand it, sir. Of course you didn't. You don't know what snow is, do you? Jonas shook his head. Or a sled, runners? No, sir, Jonas said. Downhill? The term means nothing to you? Nothing, sir. Well, it's a place to start. I've been wondering how to begin. Move to the bed and lie face down. Remove your tunic first. Jonas did so a little apprehensively. Beneath his bare chest, he felt the soft folds of the magnificent cloth that covered the bed. I just read that. He watched as the man rose and moved first to the wall where the speaker was. It was the same sort of speaker that occupied a place in every dwelling, but one thing about it was different. This one had a switch which the man deftly snapped to the end that said off. Jonas almost gasped aloud. To have the power to turn the speaker off? It was an astonishing thing. The man moved with surprising quickness to the corner where the bed was. He sat on the chair beside Jonas, who was motionless, waiting for what would happen next. Close your eyes. Relax. This will not be painful. Jonas remembered that he was allowed, that he had even been encouraged to ask questions. What are you going to do, sir? He asked, hoping his voice didn't betray his nervousness. I'm going to transmit the memory of snow, the old man said, and he placed his hands on Jonas's bare back. Okay. So chapter 10, a little weird because Jonas is experiencing something he doesn't have any concepts or understanding of prior to this. I don't think Jonas even knew there was such a thing as receiver of memory before he was selected for this job. And so when he arrives for his training on the first day, he's shocked because there's so much different about Jonas's, about the receiver's dwellings, than about his own. Specifically, the furniture is very different, right? Everybody in the community has the same type of furniture. It's very practical, very, it's there for its function, basically a bed, table, all that kind of stuff, right? When he goes into the receiver's dwelling, he sees this furniture that's very luxurious, and it's a big room, and there's this furniture that's like decorated and pretty and like very, very stylized, and it's very strange to Jonas. And the other thing that's really strange to him is there's a massive amount of books that line the shelves in the walls of this room, which he has never seen so many books before, because the only 3 books he's ever seen are the dictionary, the phone book, basically, for the community, and the book of rules. So he can't imagine like what other things could be inside the books. So Jonas is like really like amazed by this. But he doesn't fully understand what's happening, right? And the receiver tries to explain to him, like, I'm no longer the receiver now, you're the receiver, right? Because I've been the receiver for so long, you're going to become the receiver. And because this job is so alone, the receiver doesn't have a lot of information on how to transmit, like, or how to explain what is going to happen with Jonas. Because he can't talk about it with anybody. So it doesn't have a lot of practice in talking about it and like preparing training and stuff. So he basically just kind of goes with the flow, which is kind of interesting. And it makes sense because of like, I don't know, it just makes sense because it's such an important job. You want to make sure it's tailored to the trainee who's going to be experiencing it. So kind of going with following Jonas, like what he needs to know. And so basically the giver asks him or tries to describe something to him, and Jonas does not understand at all what it means. Like the Jonas or the receiver tries to talk about sledding in snow, which, I mean, I don't live where we have snow, but I know what it means to have snow and to go downhill like on a sled, right? It makes sense. And so the giver or the receiver is trying to talk about it, and he's trying to say like, this is what it's like. And Jonas is like, what's that? What is snow, right? What is a sled? What does that all mean? What does that all mean? And so he introduced him. He's like, okay, I'm going to now transmit the memory of snow, because Jonas is not really sure what is going to happen, right? He's thinking that transmit memories means to talk about the past, right? To like almost like an old, like one of the elders in the community, one of the old would share their childhood with somebody at the house of the old, but this is different. And so he's about to find out how different it really is. So, getting into chapter 11. Gotta stay hydrated. All right. Chapter 11. Jonas felt nothing unusual at first. He felt only the light touch of the old man's hands on his back. He tried to relax, tried to breathe evenly. The room was absolutely silent, and for a moment, Jonas feared that he might disgrace himself now on the first day of his training by falling asleep. Then he shivered. He realized that the touch of the hands felt suddenly cold. At the same instant, breathing in, he felt the air change, and his breath was very cold. He licked his lips, and in doing so, his tongue touched the suddenly chilled air. It was very startling, but he was not frightened at all now. He was filled with energy. And he breathed again, feeling a sharp intake of frigid air. Now, too, he could feel the cold air swirling around his entire body. He felt it blow against his hands where they lay at his sides and over his back. The touch of the man's hand seemed to have disappeared. Now he became aware of an entirely new sensation. Pinpricks? No, because they were soft and without pain. Tiny, cold, feather-like feelings peppered his body and face. He put his tongue out again and caught one of the dots of cold upon it. It disappeared from his awareness instantly, but he caught another and another. The sensation made him smile. The part of his consciousness knew that he was still lying there on the bed in the annex room, yet another separate part of his being was upright now in a sitting position, and beneath him he could feel that he was not on the soft decorated bed covering at all, but rather seated on a flat, hard surface. His hands now held, though at the same time they were still motionless at his sides, a rough, damp rope. He could see through his eyes, though his eyes were closed. He could see a bright, swirling torrent of crystals in the air around him, and he could see them gather on the backs of his hands, like cold fur. His breath was visible. Beyond, through the swirl of what he now somehow perceived, was the thing the old man had spoken of, snow. He could look out and down a great distance. He was up high someplace. The ground was thick with the flurry of snow, but he sat silently above it on a hard, flat object. Sled, he knew abruptly. Sorry about that. Sled, he knew abruptly. He was sitting on a thing called sled, and the sled itself seemed to be poised at the top of a long, extended mound that rose from the very land where he was. Even as he thought the word mound, his new consciousness told him hill. Then the sled, with Jonas himself upon it, began to move through the snowfall, and he understood instantly that now he was going downhill. No voice made an explanation. The experience explained itself to him. His face cut through the frigid air as he began the descent, moving through the substance called snow on the vehicle ahead, on the vehicle called sled, which propelled itself on what he now knew without a doubt to be runners. Comprehending all of those things as he sped downward, was free to enjoy the breathless glee that overwhelmed him. The speed, the clear, cold air, the total silence, the feeling of balance and excitement and peace. Then, as the angle of incline lessened, as the mound, the hill, he flattened, nearing the bottom, the sled's forward motion slowed. The snow was piled now around it, and he pushed with his body, moving it forward, not wanting the exhilarating ride to end. Finally, the obstruction of the piled snow was too much for the thin runners of the sled, and he came to a stop. He sat there for a moment, panting, holding the rope in his hands. Tentatively, he opened his eyes. Not the Snow Hill sled eyes, for they had been open throughout the strange ride. He opened his ordinary eyes, and he saw he was still on the bed, that he had not moved at all. The old man, still beside the bed, was watching him. "How do you feel?" he asked. Jonas sat up and tried to answer honestly. "Surprised?" he said after a moment. The old man wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Phew," he said. "It was exhausting, but even transmitting that tiny memory to you, I think it lightened me just a little." "Do you mean, you did say I could ask questions?" The man nodded, encouraging his question. "Do you mean that now you don't have the memory of it, of that ride on the sled anymore?" "That's right, a little weight off this old body." "But it was such fun, and now you don't have it anymore. I took it from you." The old man laughed. "All I gave you was one ride on one sled in one snow on one hill. I have a whole world of them in my memory. I could give them to you one by one 1,000 times, and there would still be more." "Are you saying that I mean we could do it again?" Jonas asked. "I'd really like to. I think I could steer by pulling the rope. I didn't try this time because it was so new." The old man, laughing, shook his head. "Maybe another day, for another treat. But there is no time, really, to just play. I only wanted to begin by showing you how it works. Now," he said, turning businesslike, "lie back down. I want to—" Jonas did. He was eager for whatever experience would come next. But he had suddenly so many questions. "Why don't we have snow and sleds and hills?" he asked. "And when did we, in the past? Did my parents have sleds when they were young? Did you?" The old man shrugged and gave a sort of laugh. "No," he told Jonas. "It's a very distant memory. That's why it was so exhausting. I had to tug it forward from many generations back. It was given to me when I was a new receiver, and the previous receiver had to pull it through a long time period too." "But what happens to those things?" "Snow and the rest of it. Climate control. Snow made growing food difficult, limited the agricultural periods, and unpredictable weather and transportation almost impossible at times. It wasn't a practical thing, so it became obsolete when we went to sameness." "And hills, too," he added. "They made conveyance of goods unwieldy. Trucks, buses slowed them down. So," he waved his hand as if the gesture had caused hills to disappear. "Sameness," he concluded. Jonas frowned. "I wish we had those things still, just now and then." The old man smiled. "So do I," he said. "But that choice is not ours." "But, sir," Jonas suggested, "since you have so much power—" The man corrected him. "Honor," he said firmly. "I have great honor. So will you. But you will find that it is not the same as power. Lie quietly now. Since we've entered into the topic of climate, let me give you something else." The man this time I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I want to test the receiving. You should be able to perceive the name without being told. I gave away snow and sled and downhill and runners by telling them to you in advance. Without being instructed, Jonas closed his eyes again. He felt the hands on his back again. He waited. Now it came more quickly, the feelings. This time the hands didn't become cold, but instead began to feel warm on his body. They moistened a little. The warmth spread, extending across his shoulders, up his neck, onto the side of his face. He could feel it through his clothed parts, too, a pleasant all-over sensation, and then he licked his lips this time. The air was hot and heavy. He didn't move. There was no sled. His posture didn't change. He was simply alone someplace, out of doors, lying down, and the warmth came from above. It was not as exciting as the ride through the snowing air, but it was pleasurable and comforting. Suddenly, he perceived the word for it. Sunshine. he perceived it came from the sky. Then it ended. Sunshine, he said aloud, opening his eyes. Good, you did get the word. That makes my job easier, not so much explaining. And it came from the sky. That's right, the old man said, just the way it used to. Before sameness and before climate control, Jonas added. The man laughed. You receive well and learn quickly. I'm very pleased with you. That's enough for today, I think. We're off to a good start. There was a question bothering Jonas. Sir, he said, the chief elder told me. She told everyone, and you told me too, that it would be painful. So I was a little scared, but it didn't hurt at all. I really enjoyed it. He looked quizzically at the old man. The man sighed. I started you with memories of pleasure. My previous failure gave me the wisdom to do that. He took a few deep breaths. Jonas, he said, it will be painful, but it need not be painful yet. I'm brave. I really am. Jonas sat up a little straighter. The old man looked at him for a moment. He smiled. I can see that, he said. Well, since you asked the question, I think I have enough energy for one more transmission. Lie down once more. This will be the last today. Jonas obeyed cheerfully. He closed his eyes, waiting, and felt the hands again. Then he felt the warmth again, the sunshine again, coming from the sky of this other consciousness that was now so new to him. This time, as he lay basking in the wonderful warmth, he felt the passage of time. His real self-awareness was aware that it was only a minute or two, but his other memory-receiving self felt hours pass in the sun. His skin began to sting. Restlessly, he moved one arm, bending it, and felt a sharp pain in the crease of his inner arm at the elbow. Ouch, he said loudly, and shifted on the bed. Ow, he said, wincing at the shift, and even moving his mouth to speak made his face hurt. He knew there was a word, but the pain kept him from grasping it. Then it ended. He opened his eyes, wincing with discomfort. It hurt, he told the old man, and I couldn't get the word for it. It was a sunburn, the old man told him. It hurt a lot, Jonas said, but I'm glad you gave it to me. It was interesting, and now I understand better what it meant that there would be pain. The man didn't respond. He sat silently for a second. Finally, he said, Get up now. It's time for you to go home. They both walked to the center of the room. Jonas put his tunic back on. Goodbye, sir, he said. Thank you for my first day. The old man nodded to him. He looked drained and a little sad. Sir? Yes, do you have a question? Jonas asked shyly. Yes, do you have a question? It's just that I don't know your name. I thought you were the receiver, but you say that now I'm the receiver, so I don't know what to call you. The man had sat back down in the comfortable, unupholstered chair. He moved his shoulders around as if to ease away an aching sensation. He seemed terribly weary. Call me the Giver, he told Jonas. Okay, that's the title of the book. So now we know that the previous receiver becomes the giver when the new receiver is selected because the receiver of memory is getting the memories and the giver is the one giving the memories. Oh my gosh, it makes so much sense now. Wow, what a big surprise. Okay, let's continue. Let's just go back real quick. So he gets this memory of snow, and it includes a sled ride, right? Like sliding down a hill in the snow. And Jonas loves it. Jonas is so just amazed and he enjoys it so much. He has such a great time and he feels the joy of the memory. And the giver is happy with this, right? Because Jonas is able to perceive words when he's taking these memories in. And it's good to start with pleasurable memories. So he gets the snow memory and then he also gets the sunshine memory and he's able to respond to that. Oh, this is what that means. It means sunshine. And we learned that in Jonas's world, they don't have sunshine. They don't have snow because they have climate control, which keeps everything the same weather conditions for growing crops and transportation because, weather can be difficult to manage with that kind of thing, right? Like transportation and food and stuff. So it was just easier to keep everything the same and have climate control and get rid of snow and sunshine. But it does make you wonder, how their weather is controlled and how people perceive the weather in his world, because it doesn't really seem like Jonas has a perception of it. It's just always the same. Jonas brings up this really important thing when he's talking to the giver. He says like, like, why can't we have these things anymore? Because it's like, those things are nice. It'd be nice to have them like at least once in a while because they're fun. The snow ride was fun and the sunshine was beautiful and warm. And he's like, if you have the power to change it, why don't you? And the giver's like, no. The receiver of memory doesn't have power. The receiver of memory has honor, which is two very different things. And this is our first kind of foreshadowing clue as to what is going to happen with Jonas, right? Like he's now asking these questions about like, why can't our community change to have these things that we have from the past? And the giver is automatically trying to like stop him. Like, actually, we just keep them. We just keep these memories. We're not here to like change the rules right now. We're just here to like provide the wisdom. So the committee of elders is ultimately the group that's going to change the rules, not the giver. Okay. And then he receives a painful memory as well before the end of this chapter, the sunburn memory. Because Jonas asks about it and the giver is like, well, I don't want to do it yet because last time when I had a failed receiver, I gave the painful memories too soon. And he's like, I don't want to do that yet. And Jonas is kind of like, well, I'm brave. Like I can handle it. And so the giver's like, okay, I'll do one more and we'll make kind of like an easy, painful memory, I guess, because it is a sunburn. But it does hurt Jonas in kind of a way that he's never really experienced that kind of hurt because they don't have sunshine. And he thinks, oh, that was it, right? Okay, well, now I understand there's going to be pain, right? And he's like seeming like, oh, it's fine. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that bad. But the giver's response to him is another clue, right? He didn't respond. He sat silently for a second, which means that that's not the worst pain that Jonas is going to experience, right? Like, and it's going to be more than just physical pain, the physical pain of a sunburn, which eventually goes away, right? It's going to be other types of pain as well. And that's when we also learn who the giver is, the title of the book. We're coming full circle right here in chapter 11, moving on to chapter 12. And we're going to try and get to chapter 14 today. I'm going to take a quick water break, fill up my water before we get into the last three chapters. So let me play some music for you while I go fill this up. I'll be right back. Okay, I've had a good break. Got my water. Ready to finish up these last few chapters for this stream. Let's see. We've only been live for like an hour. So we might go to we're planning to get to chapter 14, but we'll see. Maybe we have a little bit of extra time to get into the later chapters. Let me just check this real quick. Okay, so we're planning on ending here. We could go a little bit further, maybe chapter... Maybe chapter 15 or 16. We will see. Okay. We'll see. We're going to put a little bookmark. Whoops. We're going to put a little bookmark into chapter 14, which is where I plan to be. But if we make it to chapter 16, oh yeah, we might make it. Okay, we might make it to chapter 16 because that's gonna get really good. It gets really good, right? I mean, we've already gotten to a really good part of the story with Jonas like receiving his first memories and going into his training as receiver of memory. But I think it's really, really going to start to get good into these next few chapters because we already see Jonas like having these moments of like questioning, like why does it have to be this way? Why can't we have weather? Why can't we have these nice things? And that's gonna be interesting too, right? Instead of the giver starting off Jonas with painful memories, he's starting him off with pleasurable memories, and it makes Jonas be like, hey, why can't we have these pleasurable things now? Like, these seem nice. It seems great, right? Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get into chapter 12 of The Giver. Oh, wait, I'm going to turn down my music here. All right, chapter 12. You slept soundly, Jonas? His mother asked at the morning meal. No dreams? Jonas simply smiled and nodded, not ready to lie, not willing to tell the truth. I slept very soundly, he said. I wish this one would, his father said, leaning down from his chair to touch Gabriel's waving fist. The basket was on the floor beside him. In its corner beside Gabriel's head, the stuffed pillow sat staring with its blank eyes. So do I, Mother said, rolling her eyes. He's so fretful at night. Jonas had not heard the new child during the night because, as always, he had slept soundly. But it was not true that he had no dreams. Again and again, as he slept, he had slid down the snow-covered hill. Always in the dream, it seemed as if there were a destination, a something. He could not grasp a what. That lay beyond the place where the thickness of snow brought the sled to a stop. He was left, upon awakening, with this feeling that he wanted, even somehow needed, to reach the something that waited in the distance. The feeling that it was good, that it was welcoming, that it was significant. But he did not know how to get there. He tried to shed the leftover dream, gathering his schoolwork and preparing for the day. School seemed a little different today. The classes were the same: language and communications, commerce and industry, and science and technology, civil procedures and government. But during the breaks for recreation periods and the midday meal, the other new 12s were abuzz with descriptions of their first day of training. All of them talked at once, interrupting each other, hastily making the required apology for interrupting, then forgetting again the excitement of describing the new experiences. Jonas listened. He was very aware of his own admonition not to discuss his training. But it would have been impossible anyway. There was no way to describe to his friends what he had experienced in the annex room. How could you describe a sled without describing a hill and snow? And how could you describe a hill and snow to someone who had never felt height or wind or that feathery magical cold? Even trained for years, as they all had been, in the precision of language, what words could you use to describe? What words could you use which would give another experience of sunshine? So it was easy for Jonas to be still and listen. After school hours, he rode again beside Fiona to the house of the old. I looked for you yesterday, she told him, so we could ride home together. Your bike was still there, and I waited for a little while, but it was getting late, so I went home. I apologize for making you wait, Jonas said. I accept your apology, she replied automatically. I stayed a little longer than I expected, Jonas explained. She pedaled forward silently, and he knew that she expected him to tell her why. She expected him to describe his first day of training, but to ask would have fallen into the category of rudeness. You've been doing so many volunteer hours with the old, Jonas said, changing the subject. There won't be much that you don't already know. Oh, there's lots to learn, Fiona replied. There's administrative work and dietary rules and punishment for disobedience. Did you know that they use a discipline wand on the old? The same as for small children? And there's an occupational therapy and recreational activities and medications, and they reached the building and braked their bikes. I really think I'll like it better than school, Fiona confessed. Me too, Jonas agreed, wheeling his bike into its place. She waited for a second, as if again she expected him to go on. Then she looked at her watch, waved, and hurried toward the entrance. Jonas stood for a moment beside his bike, startled. It had happened again. The thing that he thought of now as seeing beyond. This time, it had been Fiona who had undergone that fleeting, indescribable change. As he looked up and toward her going through the open door, it happened. She changed. Actually, Jonas thought, trying to recreate it in his mind, it wasn't Fiona in her entirety. It seemed to be just her hair, and just for that flickering instant. He ran through it in his mind. It was clearly beginning to happen more often. First, the apple a few weeks before. The next time had been the faces in the audience at the auditorium just 2 days ago. Now today, Fiona's hair. Frowning, Jonas walked toward the annex. I will ask the giver, he decided. The old man looked up, smiling, when Jonas entered the room. He was already seated beside the bed, and he seemed more energetic today, slightly renewed and glad to see Jonas. Welcome, he said. We must get started. You're 1 minute late. I apologize, Jonas began, and then stopped, flustered, remembering there were to be no apologies. He removed his tunic and went to the bed. I'm 1 minute late because something happened, he explained, and I'd like to ask you about it if you don't mind. You may ask me anything. Jonas tried to sort it out in his mind so he could explain it clearly. I think it's what you call seeing beyond, he said. The giver nodded. Describe it. Jonas told him about the experience with the apple, then the moment on stage when he looked out and seen the same phenomenon on the faces of the crowd. Then today, just now, outside, it happened with my friend Fiona. She herself didn't change exactly, but something about her changed for a second. Her hair looked different, but not in its shape or in its length. I can't quite, Jonas paused, frustrated by his inability to grasp and describe exactly what had occurred. Finally, he simply said, It changed. I don't know how or why. That's why I was 1 minute late, he concluded, and looked questioningly at the giver. To his surprise, the old man asked him a question which seemed unrelated to the seeing beyond. When I gave you the memory yesterday, the first one, the ride on the sled, did you look around? Jonas nodded. Yes, he said. But the snow in the air made it hard to see anything. Did you look at the sled? Jonas thought back. No, I only felt it underneath me. I dreamed of it last night too, but I don't remember seeing the sled in my dream, either, just feeling it. The giver seemed to be thinking. When I was observing you before this election, I perceived that you probably had the capacity, and what you described confirms that. It happened somewhat differently for me, the giver told him. When I was just your age, about to become the new receiver, I began to experience it, though it took a different form. With me it was, well, I won't describe that now. You wouldn't understand it yet. But I think I can guess how it's happening with you. Let me just make a little test to confirm my guess. Lie down. Jonas lay on the bed, and with his hands at his sides, he felt comfortable here now. He closed his eyes and waited for the familiar feel of the giver's hands on his back. But it didn't come. Instead, the giver instructed him, call back the memory of the ride on the sled, just the beginning of it, where you're at the top of the hill before the slide starts. And this time, look down at the sled. Jonas was puzzled. He opened his eyes. Excuse me, he asked politely, but don't you have to give me the memory? It's your memory now. It's not mine to experience any longer. I gave it away. But how can I call it back? You can remember last year, or the year that you were a 7 or a 5, can't you? Of course. It's much the same. Everyone in the community has one generation memories like those. But now you'll be able to go back farther. Try. Just concentrate. Jonas closed his eyes again. He took a deep breath and sought the sled and the hill and the snow in his consciousness. There they were, with no effort. He was again sitting in the whirling snow of snowflakes atop the hill. Jonas grinned with delight and blew his own steamy breath into view. Then, as he had been instructed, he looked down. He saw his own hands furred again with snow, holding the rope. He saw his legs and moved them aside for a glimpse of the sled beneath. Dumbfounded, he stared at it. This time, it was not a fleeting impression. This time, the sled had and continued to have as he blinked and stared at it again. that same mysterious quality that the apple had so briefly. And Fiona's hair, the sled did not change. It simply was whatever the thing was. Jonas opened his eyes and was still on the bed. The giver was watching him curiously. Yes, Jonas said slowly, I saw it. In the sled. Let me try one more thing. Look over there to the bookcase. Do you see the very top row of books, the ones behind the table on the top shelf? Jonas sought them with his eyes. He stared at them, and they changed, but the change was fleeting. It slipped away the next instant. It happened, Jonas said. It happened to the books, but it went away again. I'm right then, the giver said. You're beginning to see the color red. The what? The giver sighed. How do I explain this? Once, back in the time of the memories, everything had a shape and size the way things still do, but they also had a quality called color. There were lots of colors, and one of them was called red. That's the one you're starting to see. Your friend Fiona has red hair. Quite distinctive, actually. I've noticed it before. When you mentioned Fiona's hair, it was the clue that told me you were probably beginning to see the color red. And the faces of the people? The ones I saw at the ceremony? The giver shook his head. No, flesh isn't red, but it had red tones in it. There was a time, actually, you'll see this in the memories later, when flesh was many different colors. That was before we went to sameness. Today, flesh is all the same. And what you saw was the red tones. Probably when you saw the faces take on color, it wasn't as deep or vibrant as the apple or your friend's hair. The giver chuckled suddenly. We never completely mastered sameness. I suppose the genetic scientists are still hard at work trying to work the kinks out. Hair like Fiona's must drive them crazy. Jonas listened, trying hard to comprehend. And the sled, he said? It had the same thing, the color red. But it didn't change, Giver. It just was. Because it's a memory from the time when color was. It was so... Oh, I wish language were more precise. The red was so beautiful. The giver nodded. It is. Do you see it all the time? I see all of them. All the colors. Will I? Of course. When you receive the memories, you have the capacity to see beyond. You'll gain wisdom. Then, along with colors and lots more. Jonas wasn't interested just then in wisdom. It was the colors that fascinated him. Why can't everyone see them? Why did the colors disappear? The giver shrugged. Our people made that choice, the choice to go to sameness. Before my time, before the previous time, back and back and back. We relinquished color when we relinquished some sunshine and did away with differences. He thought for a moment. We gained control of many things, but we had to let go of others. We shouldn't have, Jonas said fiercely. The giver looked startled at the certainty of Jonas's reaction. Then he smiled wryly. You've come very quickly to that conclusion, he said. It took me many years. Maybe your wisdom will come much more quickly than mine. He glanced at the wall clock. Lie back down now. We have so much to do. Giver, Jonas asked as he arranged himself back on the bed, how did it happen to you when you were becoming the receiver? You said that seeing beyond happened to you, but not the same way. The hands came to his back. Another day, the giver said gently. I'll tell you another day. Now we must work, and I've thought of a way to help you with the concept of color. Close your eyes and be still. I'm going to give you a memory of a rainbow. Oh, rainbow. Okay. Chapter 12, big bombshell information. We learn that Jonas is starting to see color, which means that the rest of the people in the community don't see color, right? They see in black and white. And so when Jonas is looking at different things in the community, he's like, oh, it's actually turning red. It's changing. The color itself is changing, and he's seeing red, like the apple and Fiona's hair and the faces in the crowd and the books in the giver's library. So, and Jonas is like so fascinated by this. And we also learned that seeing beyond isn't just seeing colors, because the giver is saying that he has the capacity to see beyond, but it wasn't the same. So maybe it was something else that he was experiencing that they currently don't have. But we know that the receiver of memory, the person who's selected, has this ability, this kind of like this magical ability. And we don't understand how it fully works, right? Obviously, there's science in this community because they talk about genetic scientists. And we know that they have to have some kind of science for all of the stuff that they have in the community, like the pills, the medication, like the food, because they don't have animals. So, how are they going to have food? So, they must kind of maybe they have cultured meat or they're growing certain types of meat in order for people to eat. But we know that there's some kind of science involved, possibly some technology involved in this world, but that it's not accessible by everybody. Because they have climate control. How do they control the climate? They have some kind of technology or science involved in that. So, and again, right, Jonas is getting these memories and he's learning all about this and it's really opening up his mind and he starts to question it, right? He's starting to question why things have changed, and he even is like defiantly saying, well, we shouldn't have gotten rid of colors. We shouldn't have gotten rid of weather. But the giver brings up a lot of things, right? Like how flesh wasn't always the same color, that there were people whose skin was different colors. And what that led to, he doesn't mention what it led to, but obviously we know in our society what it does lead to. It leads to discrimination. But with sameness, when we go to sameness, we eliminate all these colors, and therefore there's no need to discriminate against anyone because everyone is the same. So, but Jonas thinks it's unfair, right? Jonas is acting as if this is really not fair of the community to do because colors are beautiful. And he points that out, right? Seeing the color red is like, the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. And he wants to see more. He wants to see all of the colors of the rainbow, which is what they talk about at the end, which is what he gets at the end. So he's really, really fascinated by this. And it's making him starting to be a little questioning of the community and starting maybe even to fall on the side of defiance, like we shouldn't change this. We should go back to it, but Jonas still does not fully understand what's going on in the community, like he's just getting these memories and the wisdom is starting to come to him, but he doesn't have all of the knowledge yet. And so he's making these judgments not necessarily based on the full facts. So I think as he goes along and as he gets more memories from the giver, he's going to start getting more facts. Maybe it'll make him change his mind and be like, okay, maybe this was the right thing to do. But, these early clues, we shouldn't have. Jonas said fiercely, like, that's definitely a clue that Jonas is probably going to be more and more against the community being run this way. All right, chapter 13. Days went by and weeks, Jonas learned through the memories, the names of colors, and now he began to see them all in his ordinary life, though he knew it was ordinary no longer and would never be again. But they didn't last. They would be a glimpse of green, the landscaped lawn around the central plaza, a bush on the riverbank, the bright orange of pumpkins being trucked in from the agricultural fields beyond the community boundary, seen in an instant, the flash of brilliant color, but gone again, returning to the flat, hueless shade. The giver told him that it would be a very long time before he had the colors to keep. But I want them, Jonas said angrily. It isn't fair that nothing has color. Not fair? The giver looked at Jonas curiously. Explain what you mean. Well, Jonas had to stop and think it through. If everything's the same, then there aren't any choices. I want to wake up in the morning and decide things. I want a blue tunic or a red one. He looked down at himself, at the colorless fabric of his clothing. But it's all the same, always. Then he laughed a little. I know it's not important what you wear, it doesn't matter, but it's the choosing that's important, isn't it? The giver asked him. Jonas nodded. My little brother, he began, and then corrected himself. No, that's not accurate. He's not my brother, not really. But this new child that my family takes care of, his name's Gabriel. Yes, I know about Gabriel. Well, he's right at the age where he's learning so much. He grabs toys when we hold them in front of him. My father says he's learning small muscle control, and he's really cute, the giver nodded. But now that I can see colors, at least sometimes, I was just thinking, what if we could hold things up that were bright red or bright yellow, and he could choose instead of the sameness? He might make wrong choices. Oh, Jonas was silent for a minute. Oh, I see what you mean. It wouldn't matter for a child's new toy, but later it does matter, doesn't it? We don't dare let people make choices of their own. Not safe, the giver suggested. Definitely not safe, Jonas said with certainty. What if they were allowed to choose their own mate and choose wrong? Or what if, he went on, almost laughing at the absurdity, they chose their own jobs? Frightening, isn't it? The giver said. Jonas chuckled. Very frightening. I can't even imagine it. We really have to protect people from wrong choices. It's safer. Yes, Jonas agreed. Much safer. But when the conversation turned to other things, Jonas was left still with a feeling of frustration that he didn't understand. He found he was often angry now, irrationally angry at his groupmates that they were satisfied with their lives, which had none of the vibrance his own was taking on. And he was angry at himself that he could not change that for them. He tried without asking permission from the giver because he feared or knew that it would be denied. He tried to give his new awareness to his friends. Asher, Jonas said one morning, look at those flowers very carefully. They were standing beside a bed of geraniums planted near the Hall of Open Records. He put his hands on Jonas's shoulders and concentrate on the red of the petals, trying to hold it as long as he could and trying at the same time to transmit the awareness of red to his friends. What's the matter? Asher said uneasily. Is something wrong? He moved away from Jonas's hands. It was extremely rude for one citizen to touch another outside of family units. No, nothing. I thought for a minute that they were wilting and we should let the gardening crew know that they needed more watering, Jonas sighed and turned away. One evening he came home from his training weighted with new knowledge. The giver had chosen a startling and disturbing memory that day. Under the touch of his hands, Jonas had found himself in a place that was completely alien, hot and windswept under a vast blue sky. There were tufts of sparse grass, a few bushes and rocks, and nearby he could see an area of thicker vegetation. Broad, low trees outlined the sky. He could hear noises, the crack of weapons. He perceived the word guns, and then shouts and an immense crashing thud as something fell, tearing branches from the trees. He heard voices calling to one another, peering from the place where he stood hidden behind some shrubbery. He was reminded of what the giver had told him, that there had been a time when flesh had different colors. 2 of these men had dark brown skin, the others were light. Going closer, he watched them hack the tusks from a motionless elephant on the ground and haul them away. Spattered with blood, he felt himself overwhelmed with a new perception of the color he knew as red. Then the men were gone, speeding toward the horizon in a vehicle that spit pebbles from its whirling tires. One hit his forehead and stung him there, but the memory continued, though Jonas ached now for it to end. Now he saw another elephant emerge from the place where it had stood hidden in the trees. Very slowly, it walked to the mutilated body and looked down. With its sinuous trunk, it stroked the huge corpse. Then it reached up, broke some leafy branches with a snap, and draped them over the mass of torn, thick flesh. Finally, it tilted its massive head, raised its trunk, and roared into the empty landscape. Jonas had never heard such a sound. It was a sound of rage and grief, and it seemed never to end. He could still hear it when he opened his eyes and lay anguished on the bed where he received the memories. It continued to roar into his consciousness as he pedaled slowly home. Lily, he asked that evening when his sister took her comfort object, the stuffed elephant, from the shelf. Did you know that once there really were elephants, live ones? She glanced down at the ragged comfort object and grinned. Right, she said skeptically. Sure, Jonas. Jonas went and sat beside them while his father untied Lily's hair ribbons and combed her hair. He placed one hand on each of their shoulders. With all of his being, he tried to give them a piece of the memory, not of the tortured cry of the elephant, but of the being of the elephant, of the towering, immense creature and the meticulous touch with which it had tended its friend at the end. But his father had continued to comb Lily's long hair, and Lily, impatient, had finally wriggled under her brother's touch. Jonas, she said, you're hurting me with your hand. I apologize for hurting you, Lily, Jonas mumbled and took his hand away. Accept your apology, Lily responded indifferently, stroking the lifeless elephant. Giver, Jonas asked once as they prepared for the day's work. We can pause. I think that's a little break right there. So we can pause there. So Jonas is like really responding to his training with some strong emotions, which is not allowed in his community. Emotions are not allowed, right? When he gets stirrings earlier on in the book, he has to start taking the pill, and that stops his stirrings from happening. And on top of that, he's also getting really angry with the fact that his memories are making his life so incredibly vibrant and interesting and not the lives of his friends. And he's kind of trying to like make it right for them. Like he's trying to like share these memories with them because again, right? His training is alone and apart. He's not supposed to share his training with anyone. No one, right? He is breaking the rules. Although it doesn't seem like anybody's enforcing those rules, right? The speaker doesn't even come on to talk about it. Maybe nobody knows what he's doing because nobody knows what the giver actually does, what the receiver actually does. But he is technically breaking the rules of his job by trying to do this to Asher, give the color of red to Asher and give the memory of the elephant to his sister and dad. But it doesn't seem to work, right? It doesn't seem to work for them. Like both Asher and his sister are like, what are you doing? Like, that's weird. Like, stop being weird. And it could be that they have to have like an open mind for it, or they have to have the capacity to see beyond that allows them to have those memories. But for some reason, it's just not working the way that it works when the giver tries to give him memories. And then he gets this really disturbing memory of people poaching elephants, which again is not maybe one of those memories that's not pleasurable, that's painful, especially since he's feeling the empathy of the other elephant losing its friend or losing its partner in the memory. So much so, and it really affects him so much so that he even tries to like convince Lily that they're real and share with her. But again, it doesn't seem to work. So, it seems like he's going to give up trying to give them memories and stuff. Well, let's see. Giver, Jonas asked once as they prepared for the day's work. Don't you have a spouse? Aren't you allowed to apply for one? Although he was exempted from the rules against rudeness, he was aware that this was a rude question. But the giver had encouraged all of his questions, not seeming to be embarrassed or offended by even the most personal. The giver chuckled. No, there's no rule against it, and I did have a spouse. You're forgetting how old I am, Jonas. My former spouse lives now with the childless adults. Oh, of course. Jonas had forgotten the giver's obvious age. When adults of the community became older, their lives became different. They were no longer needed to create family units. Jonas's own parents, when he and Lily were grown, would go to live with the childless adults. You'll be able to apply for a spouse, Jonas, if you want to. I'll warn you, though, that it will be difficult. Your living arrangements will have to be different from those of most family units because the books are forbidden to citizens. You and I are the only ones with access to the books. Jonas glanced around at the astonishing array of volumes. From time to time now, he could see the colors. With their hours together, his and the giver's consumed by conversation and by the transmission of memories, Jonas had not yet opened any of the books, but he read the titles here and there and knew that they contained all of the knowledge of the centuries and that one day they would belong to him. So, if I have a spouse and maybe children, I will have to hide the books from them? The giver nodded. I wasn't permitted to share the books with my spouse, that's correct. And there are other difficulties too. You remember the rule that says the new receiver can't talk about his training? Jonas nodded. Of course he remembered. It had turned out by far to be the most frustrating of the rules he was required to obey. When you become the official receiver, when we're finished here, you'll be given a whole new set of rules. Those are the rules that I obey. And it won't surprise you that I'm forbidden to talk about my work to anyone except the new receiver. That's you, of course. So there will be a whole part of your life which you won't be able to share with your family. It's hard, Jonas. It was hard for me. You do understand, don't you, that this is my life, the memories. Jonas nodded again, but he was puzzled. Didn't life consist of the things you did each day? There wasn't anything else, really. I've seen you taking walks, he said. The giver sighed. I walk, I eat at mealtime, and when I'm called by the committee of elders, I appear before them to give them counsel and advice. Do you advise them often? Jonas was a little frightened at the thought that one day he would be the one to advise the ruling body. But the giver said no, rarely, only when they are faced with something they have not yet experienced before. Then they call upon me to use the memories and advise them. But it very seldom happens. Sometimes I wish they'd ask for my wisdom more often. There are so many things I could tell them, things I wish they would change, but they don't want change. Life here is so orderly, so predictable, so painless. It's what they've chosen. I don't know why they even need a receiver then, if they never call upon him, Jonas commented. They need me, and you, the giver said, but didn't explain. They were reminded of that 10 years ago. What happened 10 years ago? Jonas asked. Oh, I know. You tried to train a successor and it failed. Why? Why did that remind them? The giver smiled grimly. When the new receiver failed, the memories that she had received were released. They didn't come back to me. They went, he paused, and seemed to be struggling with the concept. I don't know exactly. They went to the place where memories once existed before receivers were created. Someplace out there. He gestured vaguely with his arm. And then the people had access to them. Apparently, that's the way it was once. Everyone had access to memories. It was chaos, he said. They really suffered for a while. Finally, it subsided as the memories were assimilated, but it certainly made them aware of how they need a receiver to contain all that pain and knowledge. But you have to suffer like that all the time, Jonas pointed out. The giver nodded. And you will. It's my life. It will be yours. Jonas thought about it and about what it would be like for him. Along with walking and eating, and he looked around the walls of books. Reading? Is that it? The giver shook his head. Those are simply the things that I do. My life is here. In this room? The giver shook his head. He put his hands to his own face, to his own chest. No. Here in my being, where the memories are. My instructors in science and technology have taught us about how the brain works, he told him eagerly. It's full of electrical impulses, like a computer. If you stimulate one part of the brain, with an electrode, He stopped talking. He could see an odd look on the giver's face. They know nothing, the giver said bitterly. Jonas was shocked. Since the first day in the annex room, they had together disregarded the rules about rudeness, and Jonas felt comfortable with that now. But this was different, and far beyond rude. This was a terrible accusation. What if someone had heard? He glanced quickly at the wall speaker, terrified that the committee might be listening as they could at any time. But as always, during their sessions together, the switch had been turned to off. Nothing? Jonas whispered nervously. But my instructors... The giver flicked his hand as if brushing something aside. Oh, your instructors are well trained. They know their scientific facts. Everyone is well trained for their job. It's just that without the memories, it's all meaningless. They gave that burden to me and to the previous receiver and the one before him. And back and back and back, Jonas said, knowing the phrase that always came. The giver smiled, though his smile was oddly harsh. That's right. And next it will be you. A great honor. Yes, sir. They told me that at the ceremony. The very highest honor. Some afternoons, the giver sent him away without training. Jonas knew on days when he arrived to find the giver hunched over, rocking his body slightly back and forth, his face pale, that he would be sent away. Go, the giver would tell him tensely. I'm in pain today. Come back tomorrow. On those days, worried and disappointed, Jonas would walk alone beside the river. The paths were empty of people except for the few delivery crews and landscape workers here and there. Small children were all at the child care center after school, and the older ones busy with volunteer hours or training. By himself, he tested his own developing memory. He watched the landscape for glimpses of green that he knew was embedded in the shrubbery. When it came flickering into his consciousness, he focused upon it, keeping it there, darkening it, holding it in his vision as long as possible until his head hurt and he let it fade away. He stared at the flat, colorless sky, bringing blue from it, and remembered sunshine until finally, for an instant, he could feel warmth. He stood at the foot of the bridge that spanned the river, the bridge that citizens were allowed to cross only on official business. Jonas has crossed it on school trips, visiting the outlying communities. He knew that the land beyond the bridge was the same, flat and well ordered, with fields for agriculture. The other communities he had seen on visits were essentially the same as his own. The only differences were slightly altered styles of dwellings, slightly different schedules in the schools. He wondered what lay in the far distance where he had never gone. The land didn't end beyond those nearby communities. Were there hills elsewhere? Were there vast wind-torn areas like the place he had seen in memory? The place where the elephant died? Giver, I'm just going to highlight this part real quick. Giver, he asked one afternoon following a day when he had been sent away, what causes you pain? When the giver was silent, Jonas continued. The chief elder told me at the beginning that the receiving of memory causes terrible pain, and that you described it for me, that the failure of the last new receiver released painful memories to the community. But I haven't suffered, Giver. Not really, Jonas smiled. Oh, I remember the sunburn you gave me on that first day, but that wasn't so terrible. What is it that makes you suffer so much? What if you gave some of it to me? Maybe your pain would be less. The giver nodded. Lie down, he said. It's time, I suppose. I can't shield you forever. You'll have to take it on eventually. Let me think, he went on, when Jonas was on the bed, waiting a little fearful. All right, the giver said after a moment. I've decided. We'll start with something familiar. Let's go, once again, to a hill and a sled. He placed his hands on Jonas's back. What chapter are we on right now? Okay, 13? Yeah, we're about to go into 14. Okay, so Jonas is learning more, and it seems like he's gaining a little bit more wisdom, right? So we talked about him trying to give it to his friends and his family, but it not working. And so he starts to kind of ask questions of the giver, right? Like about how the community works for him as this really special job. Finding a spouse, is he going to be able to apply for one? Did the giver have a spouse? And through that, we learned that there's very orderly kind of phases in which members of the community go through. They go through their childhood where they go to school and they have certain milestones each year in their childhood until they become a 12 when they're given their job for the community. When they're given their job for the community, they go through a period of training and learning their job, but then they can apply for a spouse. And the committee, of course, decides on who's the spouse, right? And I think it's mentioned earlier about choices, right? About how sameness is able to get rid of the choices for people. So because they might rate the wrong one. So the committee chooses the spouses for them, and they're able to apply for one at a certain point. And then once they have a spouse, then they're able to apply for children. And then once their children grow up, they end up going to live with the childless adults, where they, I assume, continue to do their job, but don't have responsibilities like raising the children. And the giver talks about how he did have a family, he had a spouse, but he still was apart from them. He was still alone in his job and as the receiver. So he wasn't able to share anything with his family, including the books, right? He couldn't live with his family because he had books, excuse me. So, they're not allowed to have access. The other people in the community are not allowed to have access to it. And so the giver starts talking about how like his life is in the memories, right? He's living in the memories every single day, and that's his life. The other things that occupy his time, like walking or reading or working with Jonas, are really just things that he does, but ultimately his whole time is just spent basically in his brain with these memories. And that's why Jonas brings up the stuff he learned about brains, but the giver's kind of bitter about this because no one in the community really understands what's going on with the giver, and the fact that most of the people in the community are detached from their feelings and their memories because they don't have this. They're giving it as a burden to the giver. And that's where Jonas is kind of like, well, why? Why do we have to have this if it's such a painful thing? Why not share it with people? And the giver's like, well, we did try that once when I failed with the previous selection, and the painful memories were released to the community. And this is where things are kind of confusing, right? Because The giver says that when she failed, when the previous receiver of memory failed, her memories that she had accumulated were released, and he can't really describe where they go. They just that everyone had access to them. So it's almost like, did the people in the community suddenly remember, right? Like all these memories or something? And if so, why don't they talk about it? Because it was only 10 years ago. So Jonas's parents would have experienced that. So either they blocked it out or they were made to forget or something, because when he asks about it, they don't talk about it. Or maybe they told everybody, like, you can't talk about this. This is against the rules to talk about, which would be really interesting and strange to see, right? So yeah. And so then Jonas is like, he finally figures it out. You know, he realizes that what the giver has been suffering, the memories that the giver is suffering through, are much more painful than the painful memory that the giver originally gave him about the sunburn. And he asks him, like, why don't you share some of that with me? Like, he's like, you know, like, I haven't suffered, giver, not really. He really knows. He's come to the point where he's realized you are dealing with more stuff than what I ever experienced before. So maybe, you know, you start sharing it with me. And the giver agrees. He says, it's time to share with you a really painful memory. And we're going back to the first memory, which is the sled. So let's see what happens in chapter 14. It was much the same, this memory, though the hills seemed to be different ones, steeper, and the snow was not falling as thickly as it had before. It was colder also, Jonas perceived. He could see, as he sat waiting at the top of the hill, the snow beneath the sled was not thick and soft as it had been before, but hard and coated with bluish ice. The sled moved forward, and Jonas grinned with delight, looking forward to the breathtaking slide down through the invigorating air. But the runners this time couldn't slice through the frozen expanse as they had on the other snow-cushioned hill. They skittered sideways, and the sled gathered speed. Jonas pulled at the rope, trying to steer, but the steepness and speed took control from his hands, and he was no longer enjoying the feeling of freedom, but instead terrified, was at the mercy of the wild acceleration downward over the ice. Sideways spinning, the sled hit a bump in the hill, and Jonas was jarred loose and thrown violently into the air. He fell with his leg twisted under him. Sorry, excuse me for a moment. Okay, there we go. Just gotta make sure that's ready. Okay, good. He fell with his leg twisted under him, and he could hear the crack of bone. His face scraped along jagged edges of ice, and when he came at last to a stop, he lay shocked and still, feeling nothing at first but fear. Then, the first wave of pain, he gasped, as if it was as if a hatchet lay lodged in his leg, slicing through each nerve with a hot blade. In his agony, he perceived the word for fire, and felt flames thick licking at the torn bone and flesh. He tried to move and could not. The pain grew. He screamed. There was no answer. Sobbing, he turned his head and vomited into the frozen snow. Blood dripped from his face into the vomit. No, he cried, and the sound disappeared into the empty landscape, into the wind. Then suddenly he was in the annex room again, writhing on the bed. His face was wet with tears. Able to move now, he rocked his own body back and forth, breathing deeply to release the remembered pain. He sat and looked at his own leg where it lay straight on the bed, unbroken. The brutal silence of pain was gone, slice of pain was gone, but the leg ached horribly still, and his face felt raw. May I have a relief of pain, please, he begged. But it was always provided him in his everyday life for the bruises and wounds, for a mashed finger, a stomach ache, a skinned knee from a fall from a bike. There was always a daub of anesthetic ointment or a pill, or in severe cases, an injection that brought complete and instantaneous deliverance. But the giver said no and looked away. Limping, Jonas walked home, pushing his bicycle that evening. The sunburn pain had been so small in comparison and had not stayed with him, but this ache lingered. It was not unendurable as the pain on the hill had been. Jonas tried to be brave. He remembered that the chief elder had said he was brave. Is something wrong, Jonas? His father asked at the evening meal. You're so quiet tonight. Are you feeling well? Would you like some medication? But Jonas remembered the rules. No medication for anything related to his training, and no discussion of his training at the time of sharing of feelings. He simply said that he felt tired, that his school lessons had been unusually demanding that day. He went to his sleeping room early, and from behind the closed door, he could hear his parents and sister laughing as they gave Gabriel his evening bath. They have never known pain, he thought. The realization made him feel desperately lonely, and he rubbed his throbbing leg. He eventually slept, and again he dreamed of the anguish and the isolation on the forsaken hill. Okay, so this memory is worse than the pain that he's found in the sunburn memory. His leg broken, right, from sledding down a hill that's too steep. And this is where Jonas really finally experiences the most amount of pain that he's ever experienced in his whole life, that no one in his community has ever felt before. And he recognizes that his family is just carrying on with their lives, and laughing with Gabe. And he is like, he recognizes that this makes him so lonely and incredibly alone. So he, is recalling that. And I think it's painful, not just because it's a painful memory for him, like to feel what it's like to have your leg broken, but also to realize that he's alone with it too. That's also painful as well. Okay, let's keep going. The daily training continued, and now it always included pain. The agony of the fractured leg began to seem no more than a mild discomfort as the giver led Jonas firmly, little by little, into the deep and terrible suffering of the past. Each time in his kindness, the giver ended the afternoon with a color-filled memory of pleasure. A brisk sail on a blue-green lake, a meadow dotted with yellow wildflowers, an orange sunset behind the mountains. It was not enough to assuage the pain that Jonas was beginning now to know. Why? Jonas asked him after he received a torturous memory in which he had been neglected and unfed. The hunger had caused him excruciating spasms in his empty, distended belly. He lay on the bed aching. Why do you have to hold these memories? It gives us wisdom, the giver replied. Without wisdom, I could not fully function of advising the committee of elders when they call upon me. But what wisdom do you get from hunger? Jonas groaned. His stomach still hurt, though the memory had ended. Some years ago, the giver told him, before your birth, a lot of citizens petitioned the committee of elders. They wanted to increase the rate of births. They wanted each birth mother to be assigned 4 births instead of 3, so that the population would increase and there would be more laborers available. Jonas nodded, listening. That makes sense. The idea was that certain family units could accommodate an additional child. Jonas nodded again. Mine could, he pointed out. We have Gabriel this year, and it's fun having a 3rd child. The committee of elders sought my advice, the giver said. It made sense to them too, but it was a new idea, and they came to me for wisdom. And you used your memories? The giver said yes, and the strongest memory that came back was hunger. It came from many generations back, centuries back. The population had gotten so big that hunger was everywhere. Excruciating hunger and starvation. It was followed by warfare. Warfare? It was a concept Jonas did not know, but hunger was familiar to him now. Unconsciously, he rubbed his own abdomen, recalling the pain of his unfilled needs. So you described that to them? They don't want to hear about pain. They just seek the advice. I simply advised them against increasing the population. But you said that it was before my birth. They hardly ever came to you for advice. Only when what was it you said? When they have a problem they have never faced before. When did that happen last? Do you remember the day the plane flew over the community? Yes, I was scared. So were they. They prepared to shoot it down. But they sought my advice. I told them to wait. But how did you know? How did you know the pilot was lost? I didn't. I used my wisdom from the memories. I knew that there had been times in the past, terrible times, when people had destroyed others in haste, in fear, and it had brought about their own destruction. Jonas realized something. That means, he said slowly, that you have memories of destruction, and you have to give them to me too, because I have to get that wisdom. The giver nodded. But it will hurt, Jonas said. It wasn't a question. It will hurt terribly, the giver agreed. But why can't everyone have the memories? I think it would seem a little easier if the memories were shared. You and I wouldn't have to bear so much by ourselves if everyone took part. The giver sighed. You're right, he said. But then everyone would be burdened and pained. They don't want that. And that's the real reason the receiver is so vital to them and so honored. They selected me and you to lift that burden from themselves. When did they decide that? Jonas asked angrily. It isn't fair. Let's change it. How do you suggest we do that? I've never been able to think of a way, and I'm supposed to be the one with all the wisdom. But there are two of us now, Jonas said eagerly. Together we can think of something. The giver watched him with a wry smile. Why can't we just apply for a change of the rules? Jonas suggested. The giver laughed. Then Jonas too chuckled reluctantly. The decision was made long before my time or yours, the giver said, and before the previous receiver, and he waited. Back and back and back, Jonas repeated the familiar phrase. Sometimes it had seemed humorous to him. Sometimes it seemed meaningful and important. Now it was ominous. It meant he knew that nothing could be changed. Okay, so looking at this section here, when Jonas is starting to receive all of these painful memories, and he's experiencing a lot of pain, and it's causing him to question things, right? First up, his first reaction obviously is to get the medication, which of course he's not allowed, right? So he has to live with it. Secondly, he's like starting to be like, why can't we all just have these memories and share the burden, right? Like we're the only ones that have to experience this. And the giver even says, right? Like when the committee of elders asks me things, like they don't even want to know. They don't even want to know what it is that I'm experiencing. They don't want to know about the pain. They just want to have some information, right? So that they can continue to run the community, whether or not they should or shouldn't do something. They don't care where the information comes from or how the wisdom is, formed. They just want to know what to do. So it's really up to the receiver and the giver to hold the memories so that nobody else is experiencing that same pain. But Jonas is getting upset about this, obviously. He's questioning it, right? He's saying it's not fair. Let's change it, right? And he's like really, really hyped up and passionate about this. And he's trying to get the giver to go along with him. And the giver's like, it's never changed. It's never changed before. It's probably not going to change now. It's probably just going to be like this forever. And we're just going to have to deal with it. And Jonas is not happy with that response, right? He's not satisfied by the giver telling him, oh, this is how it's always been. So this is how it's always going to go, right? Jonas wants things to change. He wants things to be better, especially for him and the giver, because they're experiencing this kind of incredible pain that he's never experienced before and nobody else has ever experienced, which makes it incredibly lonely for him. Okay. The new child, Gabriel, was growing and successfully passed the test of maturity that the nurturers gave each month. He could sit alone now, could reach for and grasp small play objects, and he had 6 teeth. During the daytime hours, Father reported he was cheerful and seemed of normal intelligence, but he remained fretful at night, whimpering often and needing frequent attention. After all this extra time I've put in with him, Father said one evening after Gabriel had been bathed and was lying for the moment, hugging his hippo placidly in the small crib that had replaced the basket. I hope they're not going to decide to release him. Maybe it would be for the best, Mother suggested. I know you don't mind getting up with him at night, but the lack of sleep is awfully hard for me. If they release Gabriel, can we get another new child as a visitor? Asked Lily. She was kneeling beside the crib, making funny faces at the little one who was smiling back at her. Jonas's mother rolled her eyes in dismay. No, Father said, smiling. He ruffled Lily's hair. It's very rare, anyway, that a new child's status is as uncertain as Gabriel's. It probably won't happen again for a long time. Anyway, he said, they won't make the decision for a while. Right now, we're all preparing for a release we'll probably have to make very soon. There's a birth mother who's expecting twin males next month. Oh dear, Mother said, shaking her head. If they're identical, I hope you're not the one assigned. I am. I'm next on the list. I'll have to select the one to be nurtured and the one to be released. It's usually not hard, though. Usually, it's just a matter of birth weight. We release the smaller of the two. Jonas, listening, thought suddenly about the bridge and how, standing there, he had wondered what lay elsewhere. Was there someone there waiting who would receive the tiny released twin? Would it grow up? Would it grow up elsewhere, not ever knowing that in this community lived a being who looked exactly the same? For a moment, he felt a tiny fluttering hope that he knew was quite foolish. He hoped it would be Larissa waiting. Larissa, the old woman who he had bathed. He remembered her sparkling eyes, her soft voice, her low chuckle. Fiona told him recently that Larissa had been released at a wonderful ceremony. But he knew that the old were not given children to raise. Larissa's life elsewhere would be quiet and serene as befit the old. She would not welcome the responsibility of nurturing a new child who needed feeding and care and would likely cry at night. Mother, Father, he said, the idea coming to him unexpectedly. Why don't we put Gabriel's crib in my room tonight? I know how to feed and comfort him, and it would let you and Father get some sleep. Father looked doubtful. You sleep so soundly, Jonas. What if his restlessness didn't wake you? It was Lily who answered that. If no one goes to tend Gabriel, she pointed out, he gets very loud. He'd wake all of us if Jonas slept through it. Father laughed. You're right, Lily, Billy. All right, Jonas, let's try it just for tonight. I'll take the night off and let Mother get some sleep too. Okay, so going back to this section right here, and talking about the new child and how there's this possibility for Gabriel to be released if he doesn't start sleeping well at night, which again was mentioned earlier in the book about that's one reason why new children would be released if they're not developing well. The other reason why a new child might be released is if they are born with twins, which it seems has happened in the community again. And Jonas's dad is the one who is in charge of releasing that twin. And it says that they weigh them, and the one who weighs less will be released. And that's when Jonas starts wondering what happens when someone is released, right? He's like, they go elsewhere. Well, elsewhere is outside of the community, and he's thinking like it's a place, right, that people are sent to, that's not a part of the community. And he finds it interesting that's like, oh, well, this twin who gets released will be, alone in a new community, and they'll never know that there's someone who looks just like them in another community. Like, how crazy is that? And then, of course, this gives Jonas the idea to let Gabe sleep in his room, which we're going to realize is a big point because earlier in the book, we learned that Gabriel has the same color eyes as Jonas, has the same pale eyes. And so this is maybe like an in, right, for Gabriel to be another person who is able to receive memories. But that's just my thought, right? Because he's been trying to give everybody else memories. Why not try little baby Gabriel? Okay. Gabriel slept soundly for the earliest part of the night. Jonas in his bed lay awake for a while. From time to time, he raised himself up on one elbow, looking over at the crib. The new child was on his stomach, his arms relaxed beside his head. His eyes closed, breathing regular and undisturbed. Finally, Jonas slept too. Then, as the middle hours of the night approached, the noise of Gabe's restlessness woke Jonas. The new child was turning under his cover, flailing his arms and beginning to whimper. Jonas rose and went to him. Gently, he patted Gabriel's back. Sometimes that was all it took to lull him back to sleep. But the new child still squirmed fretfully under his hand. Still patting rhythmically, Jonas began to remember the wonderful sail the giver had given him not long before. A bright, breezy day on a clear turquoise lake, and above him the white sail of the boat billowing as he moved along in the brisk wind. He was not aware of giving the memory, but suddenly he realized that it was becoming dimmer. It was like it was sliding through his hand into the being of the new child. Gabriel became quiet. Startled, Jonas pulled back. what was left of the memory with a burst of will, he removed his hand from the little back and stood quietly beside the crib. To himself, he called the memory of the sail forward again. It was still there, but the sky was less blue, the gentle motion of the boat slower, the water of the lake more murky and clouded. He kept it for a while, soothing his own nervousness at what had occurred, then let it go and returned to his bed. Once more, toward dawn, the new child woke and cried out. Again, Jonas went to him. This time, he quite deliberately placed his hand on Gabriel's back and released the rest of the calming day on the lake. And again, Gabriel slept. But now Jonas lay awake thinking. He no longer had any more than a wisp of the memory, and he felt a small lack where it had been. He could ask the giver for another sail, he knew. A sail perhaps on ocean next time, for Jonas had memory of ocean now and knew what it was. He knew that there were sailboats there too, in memories yet to be acquired. He wondered, though, if he could confess to the giver that he had given a memory away. He had not yet qualified to be a giver himself, nor had Gabriel been selected to be a receiver. That he had this power frightened him. He decided not to tell. Okay, this is a pretty big deal, right? Because Jonas has figured out that he's able to give Gabriel memories, which he was not able to do with anyone else in the community. So we can only assume that the light eyes is like the thing that allows people to receive memories or to share memories, right? Which is why it is interesting thinking about the previous selection and how they failed and how the memories were released, right? So maybe people didn't remember the memories, but maybe felt the pain and pleasures from the memories. The giver did say that it was chaos, right? That it was like absolute insanity in the community. So maybe people were feeling strong emotions and not understanding why, right? So being able to give the memories to Gabe seems like a powerful tool because he's not just feeling the emotions from it, but he's actually remembering or seeing the memories themselves. But again, the fact that Jonas does this, it's kind of against the rules, right? Like he's not allowed to share his training with anyone. And he's not, like he says, he's not qualified to be a giver, and Gabriel was not selected as receiver. So it would be technically against the rules, but he is allowed to lie. So he decides not to tell, which is a lie in and of itself. It's a lacking of the truth, right? So it's interesting that, he's done this and now he's going to like keep it secret. Is he going to keep it secret forever? I don't know. Let's find out in chapter 15. What time are we at? Oh yeah, we have some time left. Maybe we get through chapter 15. Let me double check my table of contents here because there are 23 chapters. What is this? Okay, that's the postscript. Okay, so if we do chapter 15, then we have 8 chapters left. So yeah, okay, I think we can do that because we did 7 chapters the first time, and we can do 8 chapters for the last one. So yeah, let's get through chapter 15. Let me double check. Let me see what's the end of chapter. I think chapter 15 is so short. Oh yeah, let's do chapter 15 because it's super, super short. And it's like kind of a good place to stop too, right at the end of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Okay, yeah, that's a good place to start for next time. So we'll get through chapter 15 because like I said, it's super, super short. And then next time we'll get through chapter 16. And that's a good place to start, like for the end, because it's like the beginning of the end kind of thing. Okay, so let's get back to here. Chapter 15. Oh, maybe I should edit this real quick. Just, oops, hello. Chapter 15. Okay, save. All right, great. Chapter 15. Jonas entered the annex room and realized immediately that it was a day when he would be sent away. The giver was rigid in his chair, his face in his hands. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said quickly. Then he hesitated. "Unless maybe there's something I can do to help." The giver looked up at him, his face contorted with suffering. "Please," he said, he gasped, "take some of the pain." Jonas helped him to his chair at the side of the bed. Then he quickly removed his tunic and lay face down. "Put your hands on me," he directed, aware that in such anguish the giver might not need reminding. The hands came, and the pain came with them and through them. Jonas braced himself and entered the memory which was torturing the giver. He was in a confused, noisy, foul-smelling place. It was daylight, early morning, and the air was thick with smoke that hung yellow and brown above the ground. Around him, everywhere, far across the expanse of what seemed to be a field, lay groaning men. A wild-eyed horse, its bridle torn and dangling, trotted frantically through the mounds of men, tossing its head, whinnying in panic. It stumbled finally, then fell and did not rise. Jonas heard a voice next to him. "Water," the voice said in a parched, croaking whisper. He turned his head toward the voice and looked into the half-closed eyes of the boy, who seemed not much older than himself. Dirt streaked the boy's face and his matted blonde hair. He lay sprawled, his gray uniform glistening with wet, fresh blood. The colors of carnage were grotesquely bright. The crimson wetness on the ground and the dusty fabric. Why is it not letting me? Okay, there we go. The crimson wetness on the rough and dusty fabric, the ripped shreds of grass startlingly green in the boy's yellow hair. The boy stared at him. "Water," he begged again. Then he spoke. A new spurt of blood drenched the coarse cloth across his chest and sleeve. One of Jonas's arms was immobilized with pain, and he could see through his own torn sleeve something that looked like ragged flesh and splintery bone. He tried his remaining arm and felt it move. Slowly, he reached to his side, felt the metal container there, and removed its cap, stopping the small motion of his hand now and then to wait for the surging pain to ease. Finally, when the container was open, he extended his arm slowly across the blood-soaked earth, inch by inch, and held it to the lips of the boy. Water trickled into the imploring mouth and down the grimy chin. The boy sighed. His head fell back, his lower jaw dropping as if he had been surprised by something. A dull blankness slid slowly across his eyes. He was silent. But the noise continued all around, the cries of the wounded men, the cries begging for water and for mother and for death. Horses lying on the ground shrieked, raised their heads, and stabbed randomly toward the sky with their hooves. From the distance, Jonas could hear the thud of cannons. Overwhelmed by the pain, he lay there in the fearsome stench for hours, listened to the men and animals die, and learned what warfare meant. Finally, when he knew that he could bear it no longer and would welcome death himself, he opened his eyes and was once again on the bed. The giver looked away, as if he could not bear to see what he had done to Jonas. "Forgive me," he said. And that is where we're going to stop for today, everybody. We're going to go back into the library and just decompress from that intense little chapter. Jonas learns about warfare for the first time. He gets this memory from the giver. And obviously this is a tough memory for the giver because, obviously, not only is he experiencing this immense amount of pain and struggle, but also he's at first was going to send Jonas away. Don't bother me now. It's too painful to think about. But he does release this memory for Jonas and feels bad about it, right? He doesn't really want to give this memory to Jonas, but he ends up doing it anyway. Because he can't really help himself because he's got so much pain. And Jonas asks, right? Jonas is let me do it. Let me take it. And it's a really bad one, right? We've got, people dying in warfare, person next to him dying. And then he's obviously a person in the war who's experiencing death and seeing all of this carnage around them and how horrible it is, right? How truly horrible it is for him to experience that. So, maybe this was one of the memories that had a hand in failure for the last receiver, right? If they experienced painful memories too soon, maybe that would have led them to stop or want to leave or escape. I definitely think Jonas is probably going to respond similarly. There's an element of resentment that Jonas is experiencing with the people in his community because, he's alone. He has to experience this by himself. He doesn't have anybody, with him to comfort him other than the giver. And the giver is kind of going through the same kind of pain. So it's a struggle. This is a big struggle for Jonas, and he's probably not feeling like he deserves it. He keeps saying, right, like, this isn't fair. And he was selected for it, and everyone made it seem like it was such an honor to get it. And he's like feeling like crap, like literal pain and suffering that he's never experienced before being given to him, which is pretty intense and pretty sad and tough for a 12-year-old. I want to end off today because I was thinking about this story, and I watched this short film a couple of years ago, and it reminded me so much of The Giver. It was like such a good what am I trying to say? Such a good almost reimagination of this world that Jonas lives in, but in a kind of a different way. And I think this is actually like a series, but I'm going to show one that kind of fits with what we've read about in The Giver today. So, and it's short. It's only 5 minutes long, and I wasn't going to show it at first. So there's like a kind of a warning in here because it's kind of gruesome at the end, but we just read this really gruesome chapter in The Giver. So I feel like it's okay. I feel like it's what we could watch this and react to it. Okay, yeah, here we go. So it's called Model Citizen.
Hello, citizens of Autodale, and welcome to tonight's PSA. What is a model citizen?
Well, I'm home.
How was work today, honey?
It was a delight.
Well, families of Autodale, a model citizen is a providing father. A model citizen is a caring mother, all in service of a scrappy young boy or girl. A model child raised by a model family to become a model citizen of their own. For Autodale is hardly automatic. You and your families are the gears that keep our engines turning and turning. And let us hope that this perfect cycle never ends.
Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. Daily check. How are we doing tonight? Well, work was a delight.
Oh, dinner was just wonderful.
And Junior's just been tucked in. Splendid! Taking after his father, I'd hope. Seems everything's in order.
Oh, leaving so soon.
Wouldn't care to join my lovely lady for a dance, would you, Joe? One day, Mrs. Robinson. Not today.
Aww.
You disappointed the lady, Joe. Deepest apologies, Robinson family. But duty calls. It would seem the cycle never ends.
Everything seems so perfect. Dancing with robots. What could be wrong? It's all grown
and
up.
when the time comes, when your model child is grown up and is ready to start a model family of their own, a true model citizen knows that their duties are finished and their course is run.
Oh, the music's changing.
I think it's time.
I was kind of hoping that the cycle would never end.
That doesn't look positive. That seems kind of scary. Oh, Um, oh, okay.
I'm so proud of him.
We did good.
You did indeed.
Why are they the only two that
Robinsons.
are a couple right now,
True.
like together?
Model
There's a whole line of them.
citizens.
Sorry, I'll stop. Oh?
Thank you, Joe. Deepest apologies, Robinsons. But duty calls. I'm afraid Autodale is hardly automatic. And your families
Are what keep our engines turning and turning. Let us hope that this perfect cycle never ends.
Yeah, so I thought that like really fit with the Giver, especially like the whole world that's involved with Jonas. The ending, like I said, like I told you, the ending is a little gruesome, and it does look
Hello, this is David. I hope you all enjoyed my return to Autodale.
Yeah, I think this is a
Special
part of a
thanks to-
series because there's another video. I think, yeah, it's called like the whole Autodale series. But it's this world, obviously, where the people are given special roles and they sit in their defined roles and basically go through the cycle of life based on the robot's decisions, right? What I think is so interesting about this, number one, is that it's in black and white, kind of like how Jonas's community is supposed to be in black and white. Also, because like everybody in the community is aware of like what's expected of them, right? They, we don't know what release is in the book, but we can make a guess based on what they have said in the book about release, right? It's something that happens to people as a punishment. Number one, it happens to old people, and it happens to babies who aren't developed or to excess children. And I think that it's kind of a big clue, like that the reader is supposed to pick up on early on in the book, like of what release actually is. Nobody knows where they go, and nobody ever sees them again. There's only one thing in our world where that happens, and it's the end of your life, right? It's like when you pass on. So obviously when we're reading The Giver, like we can pick up on that. But Jonas, who's lived his entire life in the community, doesn't understand that. It sort of similarly in this story where every person in the community is basically conditioned to live their life a certain way with the mother and father and growing the model citizen. And then what happens to model citizens when they're no longer of any use? They're they're killed right at the end. They're sent to the long line of people marked ugly for some reason. Again, I think I have to watch the other former video from this series. They're marked ugly, but then they're basically killed. They're killed by the robots and sent into the pit where they're no longer of any use. And everybody knows this is like what's supposed to happen. And that's kind of how the people in Jonas's community are acting, right? They know what's supposed to happen to them, like what's supposed to what the process in which they're supposed to go through, although nobody talks about it, right? You have to think like there are people in the community who are releasing members of the community. They're releasing the old, right? Like they have a release ceremony for the old, but then they're sent into a room with someone and they never return. Jonas's dad is responsible for releasing twins, for releasing new children who are not developing. So he must have some concept of what release is, right? So there are people in the community who know what release is and probably are instructed in their rules not to tell anyone and not to talk about it and only to reference it as release. So it's interesting. They all kind of play together. They all work together to maintain this sense of mystery about release while also keeping everybody happy. Because if people knew about death, then they would be sad and they would be suffering and feeling pain, like Jonas does experience the pain of loss in the warfare memory. So I found that pretty interesting. I thought it really fit with the whole Giver themes that we were talking about, and it just goes along kind of with the Giver. There's a lot of movies I feel like have the similar vibe to the Giver, but I will say that the Giver movie is not good. It's not good. I watched it recently, and it was I had an unfortunate kind of thoughts about it, just because they change so much. They change so much about like the characters themselves and they create conflict where there doesn't need to be. And I get that that's like a part of Hollywood, is making books and movies more interesting by creating a sense of like conflict and intrigue and, that kind of stuff. But I will say I do like the book The Giver, and I do like there's another movie called Pleasantville, which I think has a lot of the similar vibes. If you've ever seen Pleasantville, I highly recommend it. Or you'll notice like the similarities between this and The Giver. And yeah, so I definitely feel like the movie could have done a better job. I would have liked to have seen them do a better job. Maybe they'll do a remake in the future where it's like actually accurate, to the book, to like the characters in the book and stuff, because they like make Asher, I think they make Asher like a pilot or something, and it's like, okay, but it doesn't need to be a pilot. Like, you could make him the same character that he is in the book and still have the same intense reaction and conflict involved in it. Also, Jonas is like 16 instead of 12, and I don't know, that kind of bothers me a little bit. And there's this unnecessary romantic arc involved. It's like, we don't need it. We don't need it. Like, it's a good enough book on its own. You know what I mean? You don't have to, dress it up with romance and action and stuff. I feel personally, like it's a classic enough book that people are going to enjoy it no matter what. So yeah. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Happy Saturday. Hope you enjoyed the 2, how many chapters did we do? 8 chapters, 8 through 15. We did an extra chapter than we were planning on it. So I hope you enjoyed these 7 chapters that we read. We got a lot in here. There's a lot that Jonas is starting to question about his community, and maybe he even wants to change it. That would be interesting. It would be interesting to see how Jonas takes this newfound wisdom and memories from the community to maybe change the community for the better. Maybe not. I know what happens because I've read the whole series, but again, I always love going through it with students just to experience with them. So if you're coming along with me on this journey, I appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe because it's free, and why not, right? Like, especially if you liked this stream, watching this stream and reading through The Giver with us. I love this book. It's a great book, and the series is even better. Next time, I definitely think that I will talk about the timeline of the whole series. If we finish the book next time, which I'm pretty sure we will, I'd like to talk about like the timeline of the series, because it is interesting. It is interesting to see how they all connect, because it is very different than, I think, normal series, like chronological series that just go from story to story. This one's a little bit different, which I find interesting and fun. So, and I'm also going to have to add to my reading list a few more of Lois Lowry's books. Knowing that she's still publishing is pretty cool. It's pretty cool that she's still publishing and doing her writing thing. So yeah, all right. Well, thanks for watching. Have a fabulous Saturday evening. And thank you again. Don't forget to subscribe, like I already said, and comment if you have any questions, all that good stuff. And yeah, I'll see you in class.